Hey, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Wild times, a lot is happening in the world, but we remain consistent. We are on here talking about anti-imperialism every night. I am really glad to be here with all of you. So let's have yet another great late night conversation.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Getting over those fall allergies. And a lot in my life is completely up in the air, but I'm trying to be as productive as I can be. I have learned that if there's ever a challenging situation in life, the best thing is to just run at it as hard as you can and give it all you got. So a lot in my life is up in the air, but nothing is decisive. If things are decisive, I will let you all know. Things are very up in the air and indecisive at the moment. And I'm doing the best I can to never surrender and never back down. So there you go. Yeah, wild times. So the way these live streams tend to work is I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call, where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. And then from there, after I've done my opening remarks and after I've done the roll call, then from there, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there is something that you would like me to discuss in the second half of the program, by all means, send me a super chat on YouTube, send me a Rumble rant on Rumble, and I will do my best to give you an answer. I am here to engage with all of you. That's what I'm here to do. So a couple announcements, morning messages every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. Today's morning message was hilarious. It was very adorable. It was a cute video from a member of our community where she interviewed the cats, Cat Lives Matter, about the Donald Trump comment about cats. I thought it was very sweet and it was very hilarious. It was good stuff. We have morning messages on the CPI YouTube channel every single morning as a way to stay plugged in, stay engaged with our community. It's something that we do. And if you really like our community and you would like to, encourage other people, you can make a morning message. We do have that option as well. So I would encourage you to submit a morning message if you can. That would be a great way to inspire people, to be there for people. A lot of people need hope and need encouragement in these times. They really, really do. And that's what we are here doing our best to offer. Trying to offer people the hope and encouragement they need in these difficult times, but trying to get people to focus on building and construction and optimism and all the great things that our community focuses on. You can't focus on the negative. You got to focus on the positive. And so there you go. That's one thing that we've got going on. Now, the next thing that's going on coming up In Chicago, we're having a workshop next week, Working Families First, Build the Economy, Not the Empire, an all-day workshop in the Chicagoland area. It's going to be really awesome. It is going to be a great event. And if you want to come, you need to register. We've got a good number of people registered so far. It's going to be really great. And so please go ahead and register if you are interested in coming. We'll have some good food at the event. We will have some music and presentations. You'll get to meet people from our community. It'll be just a nice all-day event. We'll start pretty early in the morning and we'll end pretty late at night. And it'll be a lot of fun for everybody. So you'll get to meet Peter Coffin. You'll get to meet myself. You'll get to meet, Gabby, other members of our community. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope that you can join us for this. It'll be a relatively small workshop that we do in the Chicagoland area. It's going to be pretty good. So I hope you will be there. Go ahead and register if you would like to come to the event. Registration information is down below. Working Families First, Build the Economy, Not the Empire. That's what we're all about. So, yeah, on that note, we're going to do our live stream like we always do as we look at the world situation and with a lot of questions about what comes next. So the way this works is I give my opening remarks. They're then followed by the roll call where we find out who is on the other side of the camera. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the remainder of the night. So if there is something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant or send me a super chat on YouTube, and I will do my best to answer your questions. That's what I am here to do. So I'm dealing with fall allergies here, so bear with me. Jumping into my opening remarks for now. So Israel, it appears, is moving into Lebanon. Israel was convinced that if they killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, that Hezbollah would disintegrate immediately. But observers are looking on and saying that is clearly not the case. In fact, Hezbollah seems very well intact, despite the murder of its very important leader. The organization is poised to fight off the Israeli invaders. That's the whole reason that Hezbollah was formed to begin with. Hezbollah was formed as a self-defense organization for the residents of southern Lebanon. They fought many Israeli invasions, and they intend to continue to do so. Hezbollah is inspired by the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and it is an organization that engages in community development. And Hezbollah, despite being labeled a terrorist organization by the U.S. government and by Israel, Hezbollah is part of the new economy that is emerging around the world. Russia and China broke out of the domination of Western capitalism and launched on a road of independent economic development. A number of countries around the world during the 20th century also began embarking on a road of independent development. You had the rise of various socialist movements in Latin America. You had the rise of Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East. And eventually you had the Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979. You have had many different anti-colonial, anti-imperialist mass movements that have developed over the years, and they have many different perspectives, right? Many different views, right? The Hezbollah organization, those are Shia Muslims inspired by the Islamic Revolution of Iran. In Syria, the government that Hezbollah has protected militarily, that's gotten support from Russia, that government is a secular Arab nationalist government, Ba'athist Arab socialism. started by Hafez Assad and now led by Bashar al-Assad. And they very much believe in an Arab form of socialism and anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism. You have, in addition to that, you have the Bolivarian socialist countries of Latin America. You have Cuba, which was a Marxist-Leninist communist government during the Cold War. Then you have the rise of Venezuela and Hugo Chavez, Bolivarianism. You have the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, that promote what they call Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. In addition to that, you have Vietnam and their socialist-oriented market economy. You have a number of countries in Africa that have recently asserted their independence. Recently the government of Mali, which the military has moved the country in a much more anti-imperialist direction, just asserted control over mining corporations, arrested the employees of a Canadian mining firm that was operating in the country as they asserted their control over their natural resources. Mali, Niger, Gabon, a number of African countries that are moving in an anti-colonial direction. A lot is changing in the world, and we're looking at the awful situation of Israel moving into Lebanon, of bombs going off and missiles flying, and we're looking at this horrendous situation. But really, what this is the old imperialist order trying to fend off the exciting new world of growth and development. We were told after the fall of the Soviet Union that there was the New World Order. George W. Bush said, the New World Order. We have the New World Order. Well, the New World Order has been repudiated. And the end of history is what Francis Fukuyama called it. He said it was the end of history. Capitalism is the final system in history. It is the last system. It is the end of history. And the Cold War proved that you could not build a system beyond capitalism. That capitalism and the free market and the Western liberal democratic system was the end of history. Well, the end of history is history. And history has marched forward past its declared end because we have seen the rise of all kinds of exciting new things. And the Western system of colonialism, the Western system of radical individualism taken to its extremes, the Western system of profits over people, that system is certainly dying around the world, no question about it. And the societies of the West are in a state of complete and utter decay. And there's a lot that we can say, but at the same time, there is this new world rising. And so what we are seeing with Israel attacking Lebanon, what we're seeing with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, where the USA has pumped billions of dollars to prolong this war, what we're seeing with efforts against China, what we're seeing with talk of coups and destabilization in Venezuela, sanctions on Cuba, all of this is an effort by the old dying imperialist system to hold back the rising new world. There is a new world rising. And you cannot exactly put this in the context of 20th century standard arguments. In the 20th century, the divide in the world was said to be between Western capitalism, which was quote unquote right wing, and communism, Marxism, Leninism, which was said to be left wing. And that was the way people understood politics. And if somebody was in the Western countries and they were more sympathetic to the Soviet Union, they wanted to negotiate with them, and they were more in favor of workers' rights and social reforms, feminism, etc., they were considered more left. And if somebody was in the West and they were considered to be very, very opposed to the Soviet Union, very, very opposed to communism, and not in favor of workers' rights, not in favor of feminism, in favor of tradition and such, they were considered to be on the right. And that was the political spectrum as we understood it. The left was aligned with the communists, and the right was the people that were the most against the communists. And that was the way people understood politics. It was very, very simple. Communists were the far left, and fascists, which were the ones who advocated, destroying the democratic rights of the West in order to defeat the communists, they were the far right. And the Western liberal democratic societies were on the right, and the anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, Marxist-Leninist governments of the world were on the left. And that was how politics made sense. And even in those times, it didn't exactly make sense. Even back then, that political model didn't completely line up. It didn't completely line up for a number of reasons. One great example. Well, let me back up. Let me just say that it didn't completely line up. And the people who knew that standard political understanding, communism on the left, imperialism and capitalism on the right, the people who knew that it didn't line up the most were the imperialists. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the one who realized it didn't line up. Hollywood realized it didn't line up. American intelligence realized it didn't line up. Starting during the 1950s, the U.S. government launched a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, where the CIA started funneling money to communists and leftists as long as they denounced the Soviet Union and as long as they pushed a cultural agenda that was very opposed to what the Soviet Union was promoting. The Soviet Union promoted social realist art, whereas the American imperialists, the CIA, and the leftists that they funded promoted abstract art and expressionism. The Soviet Union was very opposed to pornography and sexual promiscuity. They considered that to be a disease from capitalism, bourgeois decadence. However, the so-called left began to radically embrace such things and to talk extensively about how that should be the focus, right, of what politics was about. We are fighting for pornography. We are fighting for homosexuality. We are fighting for free love and promiscuity. And there was already in the 1950s, it was very clear that there was a division. Stalin, the leader who emerged during the late 1920s to lead the Soviet Union, he pivoted away from many of the radically socially liberal views of the Bolsheviks, right? And Trotsky, his political rival, condemned that in his manifesto, his treatise condemning the Soviet Union called The Revolution Betrayed. What is the Soviet Union and where is it going? And there's a section called The Thermidor in the Family, where he condemns the fact that they're promoting the traditional family in the Soviet Union, the Soviet family, the mother who's working, the father who's working, and the kids. And they're giving medals to women who have more than 10 children, and they're talking of outlawing abortion. And Stalin very much pivoted toward promoting a new traditionalism. It was modern. Women were getting education. Women were working alongside men, but it was still very much men and women and promoting the family, promoting procreation, outlawing abortion, etc. And Trotsky looks on in horror at this. And there was already, even in the time of Stalin, you saw the Soviet Union moving in a direction where they were not embracing what would be the most left in terms of politics. They were embracing what they considered to be necessary in their project of building socialism. Then in the 50s, we have the CIA starting to fund cultural liberalism and going out of its way to do things that highlight the difference between radical intellectuals and the Soviet Union. And then Zbigniew Brzezinski writes his treatise about the technotronic era, arguing that the differences between the rise of the hippies and the counterculture and the new left is not a threat of communist revolution. He argues this is simply an adjustment in society based on the way people relate to technology. And rather than opposing it, we can use it to destabilize, quote unquote, institutional Marxism, the Soviet Union. Brzezinski. And then There's a movie that I actually recommend people watch. You know, of all the movies I've seen in my lifetime, this is a movie that has been very influential on my political development. I watched it before I'd ever done any communist activism. I just watched it when I was a teenager, was thinking about communism, was interested in being a communist, and I watched 2 VHS tapes, this movie about John Reed, the American journalist who covered the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a long, long film. I watched it, and it was interesting to me. It goes over the Socialist Party, the anti-war movement against World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution, the cosmopolitan intellectuals who were attracted to socialist and communist ideas in the lead up to World War I. Eugene O'Neill, the very famous playwright, is played by Jack Nicholson. And then, you know, after the Russian Revolution, you see John Reed, the journalist, come back to the United States, eventually help establish the Communist Party of the United States, the Communist International, the early years of the Soviet Union, and you see a Hollywood portrayal of the origins of the American Communist Party and a Hollywood depiction of 2 intellectuals, Louise Bryant and John Reed, who were founders of the Communist Party. The film was created, I believe, in 1981. And if you watch the film, what's interesting about it is generally you would think that communists would be the villains in a Hollywood movie. But, you know, Warren Beatty, who directed the film and plays John Reed, does not portray Louise Brandt and John Reed as bad people. They're portrayed in a rather sympathetic light. But there is a subtle anti-communist thrust to the film. There is an attack, a hint that while John Reed and Louise Bryant may be good, well-intentioned intellectuals who talk about peace and talk about workers' rights, those Bolsheviks that they're working for are not so good and are using them. And the scene that really defines the movie, toward the end of the movie, you know, John Reed is in the Soviet Union, and he's touring the southern USSR, the Muslim areas of the USSR. And he arrives on a train, and he speaks to a crowd of guys in turbans. And at one point, you know, he's giving his speech and there's someone translating his speech. And at one point, all the guys in turbans pull out their swords and start shouting, Allahu Akbar. And so then later he asks the Russian translator, he says, why did they get so excited? And they said, oh, we replaced your line about class war with a call for holy war, Islamic jihad against the Western imperialists. And he gets really angry and says, oh, don't change my words. That's not what I said. And obviously, first of all, that never happened, right? That's historically inaccurate. There was no moment where John Reed, the American journalist, was in the southern USSR calling for Islamic jihad against the Western infidels. That didn't happen. That was a statement not about what happened in history with John Reed, but what about was happening in the world at the time. Because that film came out in 1981. Yes, the movie is called Reds. Very important to understand the film because the film is telling you kind of the psyche of the American ruling class, the psyche of changing understanding of left and right. And what is the message of the film? Why is it that they would portray that as an awful moment, that this great American leftist John Reed is portrayed as he was tricked by the evil Soviets, by the evil Russians. They tricked him into supporting these bloodthirsty guys in turbans that are chanting Allah Akbar. What is this about? Well, what Hollywood is saying is that John Reed has rock bottomed, right? He has just rock bottomed, that he's supporting the Ayatollahs of Iran. That's what they were alluding to, because 1979 was the year of the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And the leftists of the world, the anti-imperialist leftists of the world, supported the Islamic Revolution of Iran because it was a justified revolution. The USA had been propping up the brutal dictator, the Shah, and the people of Iran rose up, and there were many communist factions among them. However, it ultimately ended up being Khomeini Imam Khomeini, who ended up becoming the leader of the Islamic Revolution. And Imam Khomeini was not a leftist. Imam Khomeini was a conservative, if there ever was one. He was the conservative in Iran. He was the conservative critic of the Shah. The Shah was socially liberal compared to Khomeini. Khomeini had fled from Iran because he had opposed the liberal progressive reforms that the Shah had implemented in Iran at the request of the Kennedy administration. And Khomeini was in every respect a conservative. He was not a leftist in any conceivable way. Khomeini, everything he did was motivated by his religious faith. He believed in the traditional family, the traditional roles of men and women. He believed that the reason that the Shah was corrupt is that he was bringing the Western liberal ways, and he wanted to go back to a traditional Shia Islamic way for Iran. Khomeini called himself a man of the right. He considered himself to be a conservative, a man of the right, but his right-wing ideology, his very conservative Islamist ideology, was mixed in with anti-imperialism. And in fact, Khomeini had better anti-imperialist credentials than any other political force in the country. Nobody was as consistently anti-imperialist in Iran. No major figure was as consistently anti-imperialist as Khomeini was. And this is a point that leftists don't take to heart. Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party, made this point at the time. But many people did not understand this. Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, had always opposed Western imperialism. He never wavered. Never once did he waver. The Shah of Iran presented himself as an Iranian nationalist. And during the Second World War, his father, Reza Shah, had aligned with Hitler because he opposed the British. And he said, I'm an Iranian nationalist. We are Aryans in Iran. And he'd aligned with the German imperialists. And when the CIA had restored the Pahlavi monarchy in the 1950s, they very clearly became puppets of the American and British imperialists. So even though the Pahlavi monarchy preached Persian nationalism, they were clearly puppets of the West. And when the Iranian people went out in 1979 to overthrow them, they overthrew them because they were puppets of the West. And they called them puppets of the West. And they used that words. The Shah is a puppet of the United States. The Shah is selling us out to the Rockefellers, the oil bankers, to the British Empire. So the Pahlavists who ran Iran until the 1979 revolution, they were not anti-imperialist. That's why they were ousted. But there were obviously other forces in Iran. There was another force in Iran that was very popular, and that was called the Tudeh Party, the Communist Party of Iran. And you would think, wow, if you want to be against Western capitalism and against imperialism, you would back the Communist Party because they're the anti-imperialists. No, they're not. Not consistently. Maybe they were at the time of the Islamic Revolution of Iran. They preached anti-imperialism, but they had sold out the Iranian people at one point. During the Second World War, you remember the Shah was on Hitler's side, and the British and the Soviet Union were allies against Hitler. And so what happened? The Soviet Union worked with the British Empire to invade Iran and overthrow the Shah. And the British had been the colonizer of the Iranian people. And the British had murdered millions of Iranians and starved millions of Iranians. And the British had committed horrendous atrocities against the Iranian people. But because of global circumstances, I understand. I'm not saying the Soviet Union was wrong to do what they did. It made sense. The Soviet Union was fighting for its life against Hitler. The British were on their side. And there's a country that's aligned with Hitler. And so at that point, the Soviet Union teamed up with the British and they invaded Iran and they toppled the Pahlavi monarchy because they were aligned with the Germans, with the Nazis, who were the main threat. Well, that made sense. But to the Iranian people, the communists of Iran were tainted with the humiliation of the British Empire sinking its fangs back into Iran. The communists of Iran were tainted with the memory of when they had collaborated with the British Empire in order to recolonize Iran during the Second World War. And while loyal communists said, look, that was the right thing to do, we had to defend the Soviet Union, fascism was the main danger, perhaps loyal, dedicated communists could understand that. But to the bulk of the population, when their enemy was the British, and the communists had worked with the British, the communists were tainted by that moment. That historical moment tainted the communist movement of Iran. That's the first thing. After the Second World War, the new government that came in Iran, they had elections, and they elected a nationalist leader, Mossadegh. And that nationalist leader wanted to have a good relationship with the Soviet Union, so he legalized the Communist Party, and the USA wasn't going to have it, right? They did not want Iran to have a good relationship with the Soviet Union, so the USA overthrew the government of Iran and put back on the throne the Shah, and the Pahlavists ruled Iran. Well, Khomeini opposed them. Khomeini had opposed the British Empire because it was not Islamic. He'd opposed the Soviet Union because it was not Islamic. And he likewise opposed the Shah because the Shah was working for the West. And the Shah was not Islamic. And there were other communist factions in Iran during these years. There was the Fedayeen, which was the pro-China breakaway from the Communist Party of Iran, from the Tudeh Party. And some people say, well, maybe the Tudeh Party that had collaborated with the British Empire, maybe they would be tainted by their collaboration with the British. But what about the Fedayeen? Right? Maybe the Fedayeen, maybe they would be trusted by the Iranian people. Well, first of all, they claimed the legacy of Stalin. Right? Their feeling was that they were the true inheritors of Stalin's legacy, that the Soviet Union had sold out with Khrushchev and that China was continuing what Stalin started. So that was still in their heritage politically. The collaboration with the British Empire was still part of their political heritage. But regardless, China, starting in the early 70s, took the position that the Soviet Union was the main danger and embraced the Pahlavi monarchy. The Shah's wife, the first lady of Iran, the queen, was brought to China, and she was given a huge parade and honored, and China upheld and defended the Pahlavi monarchy, and they said that the Pahlavi monarchy was fighting against the Soviet imperialists. And so the very government that the Iranian people had gone out to fight against during the 1979 revolution was a government that China embraced because China said the main danger was the Soviet Union. And during the late years of Mao's life, during the time of the Gang of Four, and also during the time of Deng Xiaoping, China embraced the Shah of Iran. They were supporting the Shah because the Shah was aligned with the United States, and China's foreign policy was aligned with the United States. So the Iranian people at the time of the 1979 revolution, they weren't going to follow the Communist Party because they'd collaborated with the British. They weren't going to follow the Shah because he was a puppet of the U.S. and they were rising up and trying to overthrow him in the name of anti-imperialism. And they weren't going to follow the Maoists, the Fedayeen, because they were aligned with China. And China was aligned with the Shah. So who were they going to follow? Khomeini, the deeply conservative cleric. He had always been anti-imperialist. Anti-imperialism was what Khomeini was all about. He wasn't anti-capitalist necessarily, but he started to be in the 1970s. He preached about not capitalism, but Islam, war of poverty against wealth. And while he remained deeply religious and conservative, Khomeini very much embraced anti-colonialism. And he supported anti-colonialism if it was Marxist. He didn't mind. He supported the IRA. They were dominated by Marxists. He supported them. He supported Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who was a communist. He supported him. and that there was support for any anti-colonial movement. And Khomeini did maintain that the West, as a deeply religious Shia Muslim, he maintained that the West was the great Satan. He maintained that Israel was the little Satan, and that they were against colonialism. And so the issue in the 1979 revolution of Iran was, are you for Western imperialism? Khomeini was the guy in Iran who was always against Western imperialism, had never collaborated one bit, had never wavered in that, despite his very, very, very conservative and traditionalist views. And, you know, he was willing to lean into some anti-capitalism, and he was willing to embrace various anti-imperialists around the world. He was an anti-imperialist. There is no question that Khomeini was an anti-imperialist. Khomeini was as anti-imperialist as they come. But he wasn't a leftist. He was a deeply, deeply conservative man. And in the movie Reds, that scene is a dig at Western leftists who supported Khomeini. Because Khomeini was clearly a deeply, deeply conservative man, and he wore a turban. And he very much believed in traditional Islamic practices, traditional Islamic courts, etc. And it was very difficult for communists in the West to defend Khomeini, especially in the aftermath of the New Left, right? As leftism in the United States during those days was very much associated with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Right? Coming out of the 60s, you had the New Left influence, the counterculture, and all of that. So supporting Khomeini didn't exactly make sense. But Ramsey Clark, who I worked for, former U.S. Attorney General, he went to Iran and he was on the ground during the Islamic Revolution. I actually stayed at the hotel in Tehran where he stayed during that revolution. And I was informed about this by somebody who had been there at the time. There was a great Iranian filmmaker, but he'd spent most of his life in exile in America, and he'd returned at the time of the revolution. And he and my former employer, my former boss, Ramsey Clark, had been in that very hotel during the revolution. And I remember sitting in that hotel, and he said, yeah, Caleb, this is the hotel that we stayed in when the Shah fell. And you, Ramsey, your boss, and me, we were in this very same hotel. And that was eerie. I was sitting in this hotel for a conference of filmmakers and anti-imperialists. And, you know, I'd been working for Ramsey Clark, the International Action Center, for a while. And I was sitting there across from Nader Talebzadeh, the great Iranian film director who's now deceased. Great man. I look on to him with great admiration. I mean, that is a man who has changed my life deeply. I only was in his presence. I was in his presence 4 or 5 times, but he made a point of sitting with me, and he spoke English perfectly. He'd lived in the United States for decades, and he was a brilliant filmmaker and a really brilliant man. And he read my work and he studied my work. He read my writings, and he took me very seriously. And he understood me because he'd been around Marxists when he'd lived in New York City. He knew how Marxists saw things. He'd been in communist groups. He knew about American communist groups and what they were doing. He asked me, but he knew this guy was a genius and a brilliant filmmaker. His film about the life of Jesus from an Islamic perspective was screened at the Vatican. He made a film about the life of Jesus that is beautiful, a beautiful film about the life of Jesus from a Shia Muslim perspective. And I remember sitting with Nader Talebzadeh and finding out that the very hotel I was in was the hotel that Ramsey Clark and him had been in at the time of the Islamic Revolution. And that was an amazing moment for me to realize that. And knowing Nader Talebzadeh was just really, really an honor in many, many different respects. I mean, he was just a very amazing human being to know on many, many different levels. I just had such a privilege by knowing him and learning what he had to offer. And folks, I will say I'm a very lucky person. I'm very lucky. A lot of things in my life have worked out. But I've got to tell you, there have been a lot of times in my life where things weren't going so well. So on the one hand, I would say I'm lucky. I've had a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, there have been a lot of moments where I tried something and it didn't work out so well. And what has kept me going is my relentlessness, my obsession with just trying, no matter how hard I can, my desire to dig deeper, my ability to just keep focusing. And I think about 2014, I was sitting in that hotel with Nader Talibzada, the very hotel that Ramsey Clark had been in with Nader back in 1979. And I think about what's happening now with Nasrallah having been martyred, killed by Israel. And I think about what's happening now with, how, they've tried to make it very, very impossible for me to, maintain my livelihood and for, anti-imperialist media to continue operating in the United States. I don't know what tomorrow brings. There's just a lot of waiting going on in my life right now. A lot of waiting. There's just a lot of I don't know. Right? I mean, there's a lot at stake coming up. A lot is on the table. And Israel is moving into Lebanon, which is a nightmare situation. People are dying. Look, I don't know if this is going to win me many points with anyone to say. I mean, I think most people watching this would agree. Netanyahu is the definition of evil. And I will repeat that. Benjamin Netanyahu is the definition of evil. And he is going to be remembered by history that way. I didn't know this, but I recently, a couple of years ago, found out that, in America and in Western countries, when we talk about someone being bad, when we talk about somebody being bad, we say they're worse than Hitler. I mean, he was worse than Hitler. That's what we say in the English Western world. If someone's really, really bad, he's worse than Hitler. In the Islamic world, they say worse than Pharaoh. Isn't that interesting? But that apparently refers to Moses. And it refers to the Exodus. It refers to the Old Testament of the Bible. They say worse than Pharaoh. And that's the expression that they use. Because in the Middle East, we reference everything in European terms. But they don't, right? And in the Middle East, there's a lot of people who think, well, the British were bad. They killed millions of us. And the Germans, I mean, they were bad. They killed millions of people, but they didn't kill as many of us. And there's a little bit of a confusion about, so worse than Hitler just doesn't work in outside of the West. You go to Africa, people aren't saying worse than Hitler. You go to Asia, people aren't saying worse than Hitler. Worse than Hitler is a very European reference, right? We know about all the people Hitler killed in the former Soviet Union. We know about all the people Hitler killed in Germany, all the people he killed in France, and Britain, all the bombs dropped on people. So we say worse than Hitler. But in the Muslim world, they say worse than Pharaoh. I am going to tell you this with all sincerity. And this may sound weird. I think that in a couple generations, they're going to say worse than Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is going to become the new measurement of evil. The way he conducts himself, the way that he is marching the world to the edge of world war, much like Hitler did, right? If you look at it, there's no way Hitler could have won World War II. There was this whole world, and then there was Hitler. There were too many allied countries. There was the Soviet Union, there was Britain, there was America, there was China. There's no way that Hitler could have won World War II, but he was so determined to carry out his master plan, and he aligned himself with those German industrialists their material circumstances put Hitler into a situation where he could position himself to march millions and millions of people off a cliff. You look at World War II. Obviously, it's not the result of one individual's evil. It's not the result of one individual's personality. It's the result of material conditions, etc. But there is no way Hitler could have won World War II. But Hitler had the fanaticism and the egotism to force World War II into existence, to proceed with World War II, and to bring down an entire great nation of Germany in the process, and you think about like the level of deranged insanity and megalomania that Adolf Hitler had to have in order to do that, right? Any objective person is going to look at the situation and say, buddy, Adolf here, there's no way you're going to win this. There is no way you're going to win this. So maybe call it off so that, 300 million people don't, die, before you and no, we're going to do this. That's Netanyahu. There's no way Israel is going to win this. There's no way Israel comes out of what they've done for the last year, October 7th and the bombardment. There's no way they come out of this stronger. There's no way that they invade Lebanon and it works out. That in the long term, Israel's fucked. So why would he not choose to de-escalate in a way that is as painless for everybody as possible? Why? Because he's like Hitler. He's insane, right? Hitler could not have won World War II, but he did World War II anyway, because there was no way that he was just going to negotiate with the world as it was. He was going to force the envelope all the way until he was in a bunker shooting himself. Well, that's the situation with Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not comfortable to just let Israel continue to oppress the Palestinians. Oh, no. Netanyahu is not comfortable to just bomb the Palestinians for a year. He's going to murder Hassan Nasrallah. He's going to march into Lebanon. He is determined. I mean, Netanyahu would rather, would rather end up in a bunker like Hitler and shoot himself than just accept, a piece of the pie. Right? You get these mad megalomaniacs who just will not be satisfied with anything other than global domination. You got to think, are there not people in the Israeli military at this point that are going, okay, they want us to invade Lebanon. Maybe we don't. How about that? There got to be people, within the American ruling class who are saying, okay, all right, yeah, we support Israel. Yeah, we hate Iran. But can he just stop pushing the envelope? And there are. And they're not just in the Democrat camp. There's plenty of Democrats who are opposed to what Netanyahu is doing, but there's plenty of Republicans also. And that Netanyahu has accumulated so much power for himself and his particular wing of Israeli politics and his intelligence networks have centered so much into their own hands. And they have this deranged vision of global conquest, this deranged desire for power. Where are the adults in the room? Where are the not viciously dangerous people in the room to say to them, okay, all right. I mean, it's not me, obviously. I'm an anti-imperialist, right? It's not me. I sympathize with the Iranian people and the Islamic Revolution. I sympathize with Russia and China. I sympathize with Cuba and Venezuela. It's not me, right? I'm not expecting that I would be in the room. But I'm saying, isn't there somebody in the State Department of the United States, somebody in the White House, where Joe Biden is pretending to be president, who goes, okay, we tell this guy no. But he's positioned himself where no one can say no to him. Kamala Harris is trying to get the votes of people who want to stop Netanyahu's actions. But I believe I showed you all the statement that she wrote after he murdered Nasrallah. Right? She wrote a statement. This is what she did. She wrote a Donald Trump statement about it. All right? I mean, you look at this horrendous statement from the White House. Hassan Nasrallah was a terrorist. That's how it begins, right? You murder the leader, one of the most, probably the most important Shia Muslim leader in the region, aside from Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. And the only thing you can say is, well, he was a terrorist. After Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani, there were many people from the Atlantic Council who said, well, that wasn't a good move. Qasem Soleimani helped the United States in Afghanistan. This is going to hurt our ability to negotiate with Iran. There were a lot of people in the British imperialist wing that said, this is not going to benefit us in the long term. They're not anti-imperialist, but they were saying that what Trump did by murdering Qasem Soleimani did not really help American imperialism in the long term, did not really help their interests, and weakened their ability to nudge Iran in a more reformist direction. No one said that. They can't. Kamala can't say that. They could have had the Biden White House put out this statement. It could have been the Biden White House that put this out. No, it was the vice president's office that put this out. Kamala has to attach this to her campaign. And she's trying to get the votes of Muslims. But she's not going to get the votes of Muslims. Are any Muslims going to vote for her? No. She's embracing the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And she will not condemn Israel for what it's doing. She will bemoan the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Anybody can do that. But she will not say that what Israel is doing is wrong. I mean, I'm telling you, this is a moment where a very power-hungry, vicious individual has centralized a huge amount of power around himself, and is willing to bring the world to the brink of World War III in order to carry it out. And I really hope that people in the Trump administration, the Trump camp, and in the Biden, Kamala Harris camp will look at what happened to Germany after World War II. All right, we can all agree Hitler, awful. Nuremberg trials, those guys that got hung is awful. But Germany has been fucked ever since. Germany's ability to be a major, strong imperialist country was very much weakened by World War II. There's NATO, British, American troops on German soil. The Germans are paying reparations to Israel. The Germans are hurting their own economic interest in order to be hostile to Russia. The USA blew up their pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, blew it up, and they just had to take it. Okay, the Americans are forcing them to buy their natural gas all the way from America when Russia is right there on their border. The Germans effectively, because of what Hitler did, because they let a power-mad narcissist march their country into an apocalyptic event called World War II. Because of that, Germany effectively had its balls cut off and has had its balls cut off ever since. I apologize for the crude and masculine language. My apologies to more religious folks, or my apologies to more feminist folks who don't appreciate that language, but I'm using crude locker room language to describe what has happened to Germany since World War II as a result of the evil things that happened under the leadership of Hitler, that Hitler carried out, that the German state was mobilized to carry out. Even people in Germany who were against it, even people in Germany who engaged in passive resistance or whatever, Germany's fucked. Germany's fucked. As a result of World War II. Germany is forever fucked. It's going to be 100 years before Germany gets unfucked, before Germany's balls grow back. They have been their standing as a Western country is effectively terminated. They have a big black mark on their record, it's like having a felony conviction or whatever, somebody can be the most upstanding citizen. Someone can be, the grandstanding, charitable, hero who rescues little children from burning buildings. But, if he's got some awful, horrendous felony on his record, that just never goes away. When he applies for a job or whatever that comes up, that's Germany. I mean, Germany can do nice things all over the world, Germany, but they've still got, there was that Holocaust thing. There was that World War II thing. We did that too. It's any job interview they have, that's coming up. And no matter what they do, it's there, that's the situation that Germany's in. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is, first of all, I don't think Germany deserves that, to tell you the truth. Hitler deserves it. The Nazis deserve it. But the reason that the Nazis and Hitler were imposed on Germany was because they were so much the opposite of that. Germany, was the birthplace of Marxism. The Marxist movement proliferated in Germany. Germany was the home of the best filmmakers and artists. Go watch, the movie Metropolis, the films of Fritz Lang. Go watch the film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Artistically, Germany was very advanced. Germany is the home of Beethoven, Bach, Mozart. Germany is a great civilization that's done amazing things. And the British were so afraid that Germany would go communist because there was such a strong communist movement there. And because they have a lot more in common with the Russians culturally, and they're right next to Russia, and the British have always feared a German-Russian alliance, because if the Germans and the Russians get together, they're not controlling the European mainland anymore. And so the British, they boosted Hitler. They were afraid that the German communists would somehow be able to take over. They were afraid that Germany would pivot into an alliance with Russia. And so to keep that from happening, they boosted Hitler. And they boosted Nazism and they boosted Hitler, and it turned on them. They lost control of it. It started doing their own thing. They went to war with it eventually. But now, as a result of a madman and a fanatical, suicide cult taking over their country, the Germans have that on their record forever, and they're fucked as a country. And I'm telling you, in the long run, that's going to happen to Israel. All right? Everything that's happening right now, the whole world is seeing it. And they make movies nowadays about, oh my God, all these people knew the Holocaust was happening and they didn't do anything about it. They're going to be making movies 40, 50 years from now about, oh my God, people were dying in Gaza and people didn't do anything about it. That's what the movies are going to be made about. And Israel is going to be tainted. And anyone who is associated with Israel and any country that was given Israel a free pass is going to be tainted with this. And I'm telling you, when we talk about death of the West, the decline of the West, the Western imperialist system coming to an end, I mean, we know which way the world is moving, but wouldn't it be nice if it could move that way without us having a huge black mark on our record, without us getting tainted by what the evil things that this megalomaniac, this insane mad murderer Netanyahu is doing? Wouldn't it be nice if we could transition to the new economy that's rising in the world, the multipolar world, and not be in the situation that the Germans were in after World War II? Wouldn't that be nice? Right? I don't think America should go down with Netanyahu. I really don't think we should. Right? Netanyahu, we didn't create Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not looking out for America's interests. He's not even looking out for the interests of American imperialism. He's gotten American imperialism into a situation where they boosted him and they propped him up, but now he's dragging them along and he's embarrassing them, right? They created him. They funded him. They give him, but now he's, maybe he started out as a puppet. Maybe Israel started out as a puppet, but now he's turned into the puppet master. He's in the puppet master situation. And what Israel has done with the Mossad and with Israeli intelligence and with their illiberal, racial, nationalist ideology, what they have done is they have effectively gotten the Western countries into a position where they have the power and no one's allowed to say no to them. And the question that I'm thinking at this point is, how do we not go down with the ship? How does Israel's crimes not show up on our record? When the dust clears in the next 5 to 10 years, whatever happens, how do we as a country not have Netanyahu's crimes on our record? That's what I am wondering. How do we as the United States of America not end up marked the way the Germans are? because we don't deserve this. The Americans are against this. All the polls show the American people, if you say to them, hey, do you want your tax money to go fund Israel? They say no. Right? Now, very, very religious evangelical Christians, very, very religious Jews, or I mean, the majority of the Jewish community, very evangelical Christians. And, if you frame it as, Israel versus Palestine, people get confused. But if you just say to them, hey, should we be spending billions of dollars? And people just say, no, America first. Very straightforward, very simple, very to the point. It's really straightforward and easy. Most Americans, if you say to them, hey, should we give $18 million a day to Israel? They say no. And if we could just frame the question that way, right? Should we give Israel $18 million a day? The overwhelming majority of Americans would just say no. And if we could build a mass movement on that basis, we could easily win. And I've expressed my huge amount of frustration. I'm not going to get into that tonight because, why beat a dead horse? I mean, I've said it over and over again. And if me saying it was going to change things, it would have already. And I have my criticisms of the Palestine movement. I agree with the cause, but the Palestine movement is very, 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 very ineffective. It is almost like it has been manipulated from within to help Israel. And I can't prove that that's actually happening. I can't, and I mean, I can criticize, and I think that Brian Becker is a coward, and I think that Brian Becker is a grifter, and I think that Brian Becker and the way he is leading the Palestine protests right now is one of the greatest crimes against global anti-imperialism that I have ever seen. The fact that Brian Becker has all the money he has and all the organizational capacity that he has, and he is leading the Palestine movement in a very, very, very ineffective way. I think that that is criminal. Now, to tell you the truth, I'll just be honest with you. I think there's a very good chance he doesn't know what he's doing. I think Brian Becker is a rich guy, right? I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. I knew the people that were his pals before he broke away and formed the Party of Socialism and Liberation. And they told me all about him. They told me all about his, large number of marriages and, his womanizing, and that's none of my business. Whatever. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't sound, no one says he did anything non-consensual. It just sounds like he had a lot of girlfriends and he married a lot of them and divorced a lot of them and whatever. I mean, that's his business. Whatever. But, but they also talked about how he was from a very, very wealthy family in upstate New York. And that's true. They also talked about how he was very much a spendthrift. He just burned through money, very, very quickly. And they talked a lot about how, he just couldn't relate to people not having money, right? There was somebody in the Workers' World Party who ran for office, a guy named Bill Roundtree ran for office in Michigan. And, he participated in a candidates forum of third-party candidates. And they ended up writing a news report about it. And this was back before the internet, so a news article that gets circulated different places. And they quoted Bill Roundtree as saying that the Workers' World Party believes that, there should be a guaranteed job of every person in which they make $10 an hour, which back then was more money. Back then minimum wage was this is the 90s, right? Minimum wage was like $3.15 an hour. And that was substantial. And Brian Becker just thought that was hilarious. And every time he saw Bill Roundtree, a black man, this white man would walk up to him. Oh, we got the $10 an hour man. Oh, the $10 an hour man. Oh, he just thought it was so funny, right? And I mean, the idea that demanding full employment with $10 an hour might be like a progressive socialist thing never occurred to him. And, not even thinking about the optics of what that meant, walking up to a black man from Detroit and greeting him as the $10 an hour man and doing this for years and just thinking it was the funniest thing. That's what a rich motherfucking slimy bastard Brian Becker is. I mean, and I was told that story over and over again. Right. But honestly, I don't think he's intentionally misleading the Palestinian movement. I think he just hates average working class people, right? We're all $10 an hour men, right? And all the people that support Trump, they could never be convinced to oppose Israel. So why appeal to them, right? And, and look at all the woke stuff. That's so exciting. There's all these, and that's one thing about rich white people, I will say. Rich white people, they're leftists. They view minorities like someone who's going to a zoo, right? And they think they're so progressive and all of that, but they're like, wow, a Puerto Rican. Wow. Is this really a transgender lesbian from the Dominican Republic? Ooh, they view minorities like you would go to a zoo, right? And so for them, white people, there's white people everywhere. I'm white. I know white people. There's white people everywhere, but I'm interested in what the, I want to see a rare bird. I want to see a Thailand. I want to see a Thailand-born, half Jamaican pansexual. You know what I mean? They're looking. It's sick. Okay, and that is how rich white people who are into identity politics think. They don't really care about these people, and actual class struggle. They've never, had to struggle to pay their bills. They've never known. And the idea of white people who live in trailers. White people who who have relatives in the military, white people who've been in prison, they're just, ew, I don't want to be around them. They're not fun. They're not interesting. They're, when I'm driving from one state to another and I go into the gas station, I see them with their Confederate flags and they smell and they're, but they're just enamored with elaborate. And I mean, someone in the chat said Kamala. Well, Kamala is very interesting. She's half Indian and half Jamaican, but grew up in Oakland. Ooh, that's an interesting one, my dear. Oh, let's look at that one. Yes. Wow. Born in Oakland, for goodness sake. She was born in Oakland, California, in Berkeley, but her mother is from India, and her father is from Jamaica. Wow, this is very interesting. Let's put her into the White House for 4 years. She will say some very, very interesting things. Look how many different accents she has. Can you believe how many different accents Kamala Harris has? Why, sometimes she sounds like a black person. Other times she sounds like an Indian person. And still other times she sounds like a Caribbean. She sounds like a bloody Haitian Jamaican, for goodness sakes. I mean, it's fascinating. She's a rare mixed breed. Yes. I mean, my goodness, if I had a Kamala, why, I would be the most well-endowed, woke anti-racist in my entire gated community. Don't you think, Evelyn? Let's get ourselves a Kamala Harris. Yes. Oh, you've got yourself a black man from Kenya. You've got yourself Barack Obama, who's half Kenyan. Well, we've got something much more rare and exciting. You got your Barack Obama. I've got my Kamala Harris. Or is it Kamala Harris? We don't even know how to pronounce her name. She's so rare. Yes, that's what we've got here. None of those pesky Americans. No, you can keep your J.D. Vance. We don't need your J.D. Vance. Oh boy, you've got a J.D. Vance. We've got a Kamala Harris, right? You thought Barack Obama was exciting. Barack Hussein Obama. We've got a Kamala Harris. That's what we've got. But anyway, I'm having too much fun. I really am. I'm having a lot of fun here. But anyway, look, you have to laugh in times like these. You really do. You have to laugh in times like this because, there's a lot of awful things happening in the world. We're doing the best we can. But the point that I was making, and if folks have super chats, please, by all means. I see this one and it's a weird one, but I'll answer it. And, any Rumble rants, I don't see, no Rumble rants have come in. But if you got any super chats, hey, hit me with your best shot because the second half of the show is what we're all about here. Hit me with your best shot, with the super chats, right? I'm here to answer people's questions. And, the second half of the show is all you guys. And so you can make the conversation go anywhere you want. That's a weird goddamn question. Port Film Co-op is asking me about Nazi opinions of jazz, but he's going to get his question answered because he sent in a super chat. So I need you all to do what he did. And you have the ability. The power is in your hands, right? If you're watching this tomorrow, you just have to go with it. But if you send a super chat, you have the ability to get me talking however you want. So please send super chats while the night is young. It's 9/11, literally here. It is September 30th, 9/11, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And now it's 9:12 p.m. So send in your super chats for the second half. Get me talking. But anyway, my point is that I don't think that the Palestine movement is being intentionally screwed. I think that these people just don't know any better. They've lived in the bubble their longest time, and they don't know any better. They really don't, right? And there's just such a loss for what we're promoting. I wrote Out of the Movement to the Masses because I'm preserving, and I made a point of including some of the Elizabeth Gurley Flynn piece, the stuff from Foster, because people don't talk that way anymore. People don't, and that there is just something absolutely beautiful about working class populist rhetoric. There's something absolutely beautiful about it. And that is what we need to get back to. We need to get back to Huey Long. We need to get back to good old wobbly soapbox agitating. That's the only answer to this. Israel is great for Wall Street. Israel is great for Wall Street, but it's not so great. Not so great for working families. Israel is, all this money being piled into Ukraine. That's great for ExxonMobil and BP Shell, but it's not good for us, right? And we just need to get back to that podium pounding, street corner agitating, that classic working class politics that they've been trying to get rid of. That is what we need to return to, right? We need to talk about the very rich versus everybody else. It's not the rich versus the poor. It's the very, very rich versus everybody else, and how we want everyone to be wealthy, right? Huey Long. I love myself some Huey Long. Huey Long was an amazing figure. Do I have still the Huey Long video? If I do, I will put it on. I think I do, right? Do I still have the? Yeah, I do have the Huey Long video. We'll put that on in a second here. But Huey Long, right? You're going to see a speech by Huey Long, which I love. But before I get to that, I'm going to sing you, might as well, right? I'm going to sing you his anthem, right? This was the official anthem of the Huey Long movement. Every man a king, thus you can be a millionaire. But if there's something belonging to others, there's enough for all people to share. In the sunny June or September too, or in the winter time or spring, there'll be peace without end, every neighbor a friend, and every man a king. That's the Huey Long anthem. Every man a king. All right? That's the American way. That's the American way, and that's the only way we're ever going to have socialism in America. I'm just going to tell you that, right? If you want to defeat imperialism, if you want to fight for a world where we don't have ugly wars like what's happening right now, the only option is to say every man a king. Any movement that's based on jealousy, I'm going to punish those rich people who've got it now, not going to work. Any movement that's based on resentment, harming other people, some people have it too good, is not going to work. We are fighting for a world where every man is a king, every woman is a queen, but none shall wear a crown. None shall dominate over others. We're fighting for a world where everyone has what they need, and the creative power of the human species is unleashed on far higher levels than ever before. And the Palestine rallies are right. They are 100% right. And I am horrified by what Israel's doing in Lebanon right now. I'm absolutely horrified by it. I'm horrified by what Israel's doing in Lebanon. But it's only going to stop if we build a movement that can appeal to the bulk of the American people. If we just get back to classic working class agitating. That's what we got to get back to, right? Money for jobs and schools, not weapons for Israel. Israel's great for the Wall Street billionaires, but it's not good for the working folks. Right? We've got to frame it that way. Let's take it away, Huey. Take it away. Take it away, Huey.
According to the tables which we have assembled, it is our estimate that 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth of America, and that over 70% of the people of America don't own enough to pay the debts that they owe. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with. Now, how are you going to feed the balance of the people? What's Morgan and Baruch and Rockefeller and Mellon going to do with all that grub? They can't eat it. They can't wear the clothes. They can't live in the houses. Give them a yacht. Give them a palace. Send them to Reno and give them a new wife when they want it. If that's what they want. But when they've got everything on the God's living earth that they can eat and they can wear and they can live in, and all that their children can live in and wear and eat, and all their children's children can use, then we got to call Mr. Morgan and Mr. Mellon and Mr. Rockefeller back and say, come back here. Put that stuff back on this table here that you took away from here, that you don't need. Leave something else for the American people to consume. And that's the program. We're not going to destroy the Gulf Refining Company. We're not going to destroy the Standard Oil Company. But we're going to say that the limit of any one man's stock ownership in the Standard Oil Company is from $3 to $5 million to that individual, and that the balance of the people of America own the balance of what the Standard Oil Company is worth. All right. Then we start from the bottom, that the 25 or more million American families shall have a homestead, a home, and the comforts of a home, including an automobile and a radio, the things it takes in that house to live on. We say to America, 125 million, none shall be too big, none shall be too poor, none shall work too much, none shall be idle. No luxurious mansions empty, none walking the streets, none impoverished, none in pestilence, none in want, but in the land blessed by the smile of the Creator, with everything to be consumed, to be eaten, to be worn, that America will become a land sharing the fruits of the land, not for the favored few, not to satisfy greed, but that all may live in a land in which the Lord has provided an abundance sufficient for the luxury and convenience of the people in general.
That's Huey Long. Huey Long, that is the kind of politics we need. And I see that kind of politics, that classic working class versus the billionaire class, fighting for working families, every man a king, but none shall wear a crown. That is the politics that is missing in our time. And that is the politics that that we desperately need. And that is the politics I am committed to bringing back with the Center for Political Innovation. And because I don't see this politics anywhere, and I see this politics so desperately needed, I'm not going to give up, because unless this kind of politics becomes popular, there's really no hope. There's really no hope unless we get some good old-fashioned working class politics. Okay? I mean, there's really no other way to put it. There's no hope without this kind of politics. We need this kind of politics. The cover of our textbook that we have designed, the new textbook for the Center for Political Innovation, the new textbook has this image on the cover. We won't fight another rich man's war. And that's a very famous picture of a crowd of Vietnam veterans, black and white together, working class folks. We won't fight another rich man's war. We used that for the cover of our textbook, Anti-Imperialist Organizing in America, Out of the Movement to the Masses. And we have to do what we're doing. And we're not going to ask anyone else's permission to do this kind of politics. And we're not going to, try to get approval for what we're doing from some old dead Marxist sect. And we're certainly not going to get approval from people who get George Soros money and people that do the woke thing and people who think they're entitled to be leaders on behalf of their identity. We have to do this because this is the only way out. And so, yeah, we have to do this. I look at the global situation right now. We have to do this. We have to do this. There is no alternative. We have to build a mass populist working class movement to rescue our country from this nightmare of imperialism. We have to build an anti-monopoly coalition. We have to unleash human growth and creativity. We have to talk about a planned economy. We have to go forward with our 4-point plan. We have the answer. And I wish we didn't have the answer. I wish somebody bigger and stronger and somebody with a bigger movement and more money behind them and all of that had the answer. But they don't. There's nobody who's going to do it if we don't do it. We have to do it. We have to do it. So come to our workshop in Chicago. Get involved in our group. We have to do it. Every man a king, 'cause you can be a millionaire. But if there's something belonging to others, there's enough for all people to share. In the sunny June or September too, or in the winter time or spring, there'll be peace without end, every neighbor a friend, and every man a king. See you in Chicago. Get involved with the Center for Political Innovation. All right, let's do the roll call. I see a lot of super chats have come in. That's good. Do we have any Rumble rants? No, just super chats, but that's fine. All right, that's good. We got a lot of super chats here. More is always appreciated. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us? Who's watching the show tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. We got David in China. Welcome, David. Good to have you with us. Alex in Brazil. Welcome, Alex. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. 4 Oaks, North Carolina. Donnie Wallace. Gabby in Chicago. Tried and true as always. April and Chris in Salt Lake City. Helen is with us. Wishes she could be in Chicago. Hey, come to the convention next summer. That's going to be awesome. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Oh, wow. It's speeding by real fast now. Hold on. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Sydney, Australia. Joe in Los Angeles. Joe. Mohsen from Iran, Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Dan from the LA area, who does great morning messages, Rachel in Winder, Georgia, very excited for everything going on with you. Glad you're safe from the hurricane. South Africa, Master Jack, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Chris from West Virginia, Craig in Perth, Western Australia, Steve and Ann in Ringgold, Georgia, Denver, Colorado, Mohsen, Steve in Boston, George Vlad in Chicago. Are you coming to the workshop, George? Did you register? Chicago people, no excuse. You got to come to the workshop, right? Kieran in London. We got so lucky with the hurricane. However, we have a chemical fire 30 miles west. That's crazy. That's crazy. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us? Oh, David Crow is back in SoCal. The van. Good. Emperor Penguin in Texas. Very, very good. Tijuana, Mexico. Joe in New Jersey, home of the revolution. Welcome, Joe. Good to see you. Good to have you with us, as always. Names and locations. Names and locations. Fremont, California. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. The South, USA. Very, 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 very good. The South. The South. Very good. Very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Gus Wynn in Four Oaks, North Carolina. Welcome, Gus. Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Names and locations? Or should we start answering people's questions? I am happy. We've got some good ones here too. We've got some good ones. So, the first one here is maybe Germany was right in the 1930s about jazz. So that raises some questions. What exactly was the Nazi position on jazz? Because honestly, I don't really know what it was. Nazi position on jazz. I assume they were against it. They considered it black music. Yeah, they banned the broadcasting of jazz. So why would they be right about that? Partly because of its African roots, partly because many active jazz musicians were of Jewish origin, and partly due to the music's certain themes of individuality and freedom. Well, I don't think that music should be banned because it's African. I don't think music should be banned because it was written by Jewish folks. And I don't think, necessarily, I mean, I'm obviously in favor of a more collective mind, but there's a place for individualism. There's a place for being yourself and having your own identity. So I don't think any of those three reasons are a good reason to ban jazz. And so I don't think Germany was right in the 1930s about jazz. I think that the Nazis were pretty wrong about that and many other things too, like, killing millions of people and starting World War II and, all the evil things that they did. But there you go. So I was wondering, see, one thing that I've noticed is that one thing that people on the far right love to do is they love to surprise you, right? They all like have this resentment about the fact they've been labeled Nazis, right? So they always want to like pull a new rabbit out of their hat, right? To like surprise you. The worst example of this that I ever saw, Charles Barron, great politician, member of the New York City Council. I really respect Charles Barron, and I campaigned for him when he was running for Congress, right? I was with the International Action Center back then. Charles Barron is a great black nationalist, a friend of Gaddafi, a friend of Robert Mugabe, an anti-imperialist to his core. I'm a huge Charles Barron fan. It was an honor to hang out with him at the Uhuru event and be there with him during the first day of the Uhuru trial. I love Charles Barron. And I campaigned for him. And the way that Charles Barron, they went all out to make sure he didn't get into Congress. They were terrified to have a great anti-imperialist like Charles Barron in Congress. And the way that they defeated Charles Barron, let me see if I can find the front page, because it wasn't, it was awful. And maybe I can show you the New York Post article. The headline that they used, the front page of the New York Post on the day of the election, was designed. It was a hit. Somebody arranged this, and I cannot find it. I can't find an image of the New York Post headline, but the front page of the New York Post was David Duke endorses Charles Barron. David Duke, the neo-Nazi white supremacist, out of the blue, right? Doesn't live in the United States, from what I understand. Grand wizard of the KKK, pretty widely hated among African Americans. His district is overwhelmingly African American. Somehow, David Duke decided he was going to comment on the congressional race in New York. And he said, oh, I like Charles Barron is anti-Israel, and so I'm going to vote for him, even though he's a black man. And the New York Post ran that as a headline. David Duke endorses Charles Barron. It was a clear political hit job. But why did David Duke endorse Charles Barron? Why? Because David Duke wants to surprise you. David Duke is defensive about the fact that David Duke is a white nationalist, white supremacist, former Klansman, a lot of bad things. So in the hopes of getting attention for himself, he wanted to be like, look at me, I'm endorsing a black man. I'm endorsing a black radical for Congress because Israel's what I'm really. So when you sent this super chat, I was expecting that this super chat would be like some weird thing. I would find out like the Nazis actually loved jazz, right? And that would be, that's what people on the far right that are part of that internet far right, they love to do that, right? They love to talk about Gandhi supporting Hitler. Wow, they love to be clever. Like they'll introduce themselves. What's your political ideology? Well, I admire the kind of Western leaders that Gandhi admired. Don't you? I'm smart. You see, Gandhi supported Hitler. That's what they love to do. That's what, look, to be fair, right? A lot of internet Nazis in real life are the biggest nerds and incels you've ever met. All right. On the internet, in Hollywood, American History X and all of that, you would think that, they're all like buff skinheads, but in reality, a lot of, especially the ones that are really, real, like straight up Nazis, they're just like 15-year-old incels. And their fantasy is that they are, they're some kind of huge macho, skinhead or something. They're not. Right. And they're playing intellectual head games on the internet. Right. And they're, and so I'm really disappointed by this super chat that came in because I was hoping I was expecting this would be something like that. Right. It would be one of these like, oh, David Duke endorsed Charles Barron. Oh, Gandhi. I like Gandhi. Don't you? It would be one of those. That's what I was expecting. And some of the things, to be fair, there is a lot, that when we talk about the politics of World War II, there's a lot of things that don't match what we think that are rather relevant in our time that are brought up from many different angles. One of these guys, we don't hear from him anymore. He's kind of vanished. But for a while, I was on the hate list of some academic, on the West Coast. I won't even say his name, but he was writing hit pieces about various people. He went after Max Blumenthal. He went after Jimmy Dore. He went after me. I was in a few of his articles. He gave me a couple paragraphs, smeared me as well, and that guy, he would always bring up, bring up that Japan funded the Nation of Islam during World War II. Which I guess, is that proven? I mean, I know that the Nation of Islam was opposed to World War II, and they expressed support for Japan on the basis, Japan's slogan was Asian identity. They were fighting against European colonialism on the basis of Asian identity, and he would always bring that up. And I would always wonder when he brought that up, like, okay, so should we cancel Malcolm X? Right? Because, according to his logic, everyone who ever waves a Malcolm X poster is therefore tainted because you're waving a poster by someone who was in an organization that was actually supported by Japan, and like his cancel culture logic that you shook hands with so-and-so who talked to so-and-so, and that means that you're a Nazi. And that was the guy's whole shtick, was he would write books He wrote published books that you could find in Barnes and Noble and other places. And the whole argument was everyone who supports Russia, everyone who supports Syria is a Nazi. That was his argument. That's an absurd argument to make. But that was his claim. And it was all based on, well, if if this communist group went to Syria, this far right Nazi group also went to Syria, and Syria, is against Israel, and Syria, there's nationalism, and so Syria are Nazis, and you're a Nazi somehow if you support U.S. policy. If you don't support the USA trying to overthrow the Syrian government, if you do pro-Syrian activism, you're a Nazi. And that was their argument. And then he would always throw in the Nation of Islam getting funding from Japan during World War II, which I'm not sure is actually proven. I'm not sure that's actually true, that actually happened, right? I know that they refused to fight. They were conscientious objectors. Elijah Muhammad was jailed because of his anti-war activism during World War II. But I don't know that they were actually funded. I don't know if there's any proof of that, but it doesn't matter, right? They always bring that up. And, now, Omar, I'm going to go on a little tangent here, but keep the super chats rolling in. We got plenty more, and, I'll try to move on after this. Autobiography of Malcolm X was not written by Malcolm X. I have to point this out. I really have to point this out. It was not written by Malcolm X. It was written by Alex Haley. The autobiography of Malcolm X is a fascinating story. And when I was in Iran with Nation of Islam organizers, I learned the whole story. So first of all, right, first things first, the autobiography of Malcolm X is based on a series of tape-recorded interviews that Alex Haley did with Malcolm X. And he took those tape-recorded interviews and he wrote a manuscript. And then he took the manuscript to a Trotskyite. And this is where it gets weird. A Trotskyite book publisher. I think I have his book, Harvey Braverman. Yeah, this guy. He took it to this Trotskyite Marxist economist, Harvey Braverman. And he took it to Harvey Braverman. And Harvey Braverman, a Trotskyite Marxist economist, edited the manuscript of Alex Haley. And then the publisher took it to the FBI, and the FBI removed 2 chapters from it. And that is the book that everyone knows by Malcolm X. Right? The Malcolm X autobiography of Malcolm X was published after his death, a couple of years after he died, and it is very widely circulated. It's everywhere. It's very easy to find a copy of. It's required reading in some schools. It's everywhere in America. And it was written by Alex Haley and edited by a Trotskyite and then edited again by the FBI. So it's not exactly what Malcolm X said. It's a very, very heavily edited. It is a very, very heavily edited adaptation of what Malcolm X said. And that's what the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee is based on. It's based on that book, and that there are some glaring inaccuracies in it. One of the glaring inaccuracies is that Malcolm X had supposedly never seen a white Muslim until he did the Hajj, right? That, Malcolm X, after he left the Nation of Islam, he became a Sunni Muslim, and then he went and did the Hajj in Mecca, and he saw white Muslims, and then he stopped being a black nationalist because he realized that, it's just about God, and he dropped his racial ideology. Well, there is a photograph of Malcolm X standing next to a white Muslim in Saudi Arabia in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the Nation of Islam, because they were Muslims, and they were in America, and there were very, very, very few Muslims in America back in the 1950s. Now there's a lot more, but there were very, very few Muslims in America in the 1950s. And because the Nation of Islam, they called themselves Muslims. I mean, their beliefs were very different from regular Islam, but they were calling themselves an Islamic group. They were flown to Saudi Arabia in like 1953, and Malcolm X is standing next to a white Muslim in the photograph. So the idea that Malcolm X had this great revelation after seeing a white Muslim in Saudi on the Hajj, that didn't happen. That just is not accurate. Now, some people say, well, maybe it was because the Hajj is a very spiritual thing. It's a really intense experience. Seeing a white Muslim on the Hajj is very different than seeing a white Muslim. Okay, whatever, but that's one inaccuracy. Another inaccuracy, right, is in the book and in the movie, they portray that Malcolm X became a Muslim because he met the Nation of Islam in the prison, right? That in prison, he met the Nation of Islam. Well, that's not true either. Malcolm X's sister joined the Nation of Islam before Malcolm X even went to prison. And, his sister was very close. And he converted to the Nation of Islam after he was in prison, after his sister had been in it for a long time, and he knew about it already. And, and after some time in prison, he eventually adopted his sister's religion. Now, he did begin practicing it in prison. That's true. But, it wasn't because he just discovered them in prison. There's that's not what happened. Now, what's also interesting is it's been pointed out, Malcolm X had some kind of psychotic break in prison, it makes sense, right? That when he went to prison, right, he had been involved in organized crime. He had been involved he was a prostitution solicitor, basically. He would go to nightclubs and help white guys find black prostitutes. That was like his gig. And he was also involved in drug dealing, and he was a criminal in Boston, and he ended up going to prison for that. And in prison, he had some kind of psychological breakdown, and from prison, he started writing letters to the Communist Party of the United States of America. And they were unhinged, apparently. If you read them, he was like, he almost sounded like a Lee Harvey Oswald or something. He was losing his mind, which, again, it was going to prison for, a long time. He was being treated very badly. And, he was a very, 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 very intelligent person, a very smart, brilliant man. And he's in this horrendous life circumstance of being in prison. And, he had a psychological breakdown. And it was out of that psychological breakdown, he had some kind of religious experience, and that led him to convert to his sister's religion, which was the Nation of Islam. They don't portray that in the film. And that when he was having a psychological breakdown, he was thinking he was a communist during his psychological breakdown. He was writing crazy letters that looked like, it looked like schizophrenic. He was writing like schizophrenic letters to the Communist Party USA and mailing them from the jail. Right, mailing them from prison. He was mailing like crazy letters to the Communist Party USA. I love Mao. As soon as I get out of here, I'm gonna, get a gun and join you and overthrow the government. And they received these letters, and the FBI took note of these letters. And the guy, he came on. A screw came loose. He was in the shock of being in prison, and he went over the edge. And he was also a drug addict at the time, and he was in drug withdrawal too, which I understand he had been using drugs, and when he was in prison, he couldn't get drugs anymore, so he came unhinged, and then he came out of his psychotic episode and his drug addiction. He came out of that and decided to join what was already his sister's religion before he went to prison. That's not reflected in the autobiography as well. I guess I will move on from this topic after I make one more point, which is that, and this is very shady. The book, the actual writings of Malcolm X are very hard to find because the copyright is owned by Pathfinder Press. Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, sold the rights to Malcolm X's speeches and actual writings to Betty Shabazz, or Betty Shabazz sold them to Pathfinder Press, which is the publishing house of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyite group in the United States. And they are overpriced. They're very expensive. And it's like Malcolm X on Black nationalism. Malcolm X talks to young people. Malcolm X speaks. Those books are actually Malcolm X's writings. And you don't see them in many bookstores. You can find them in bookstores, though. They do exist. but they're hard to find and they're quite overpriced. And it's a little weird, right? It's a little weird. So, and that the actual writings of Malcolm X are much more difficult to get your hands on. And that's a little strange. And why is that? I don't know. But, and why would Betty Shabazz sell the rights to this communist group, this small communist group called Pathfinder Press? And there's a lot of questions there, right? And there's a lot of questions about the SWP in general. You can read, I think the World Socialist website has published a pamphlet. They published a pamphlet called the Carrollton 12, and they allege that the Socialist Workers' Party is a CIA front. And they make a quite compelling case for it. If you read the Carrollton 12, by the SWP, they argue that the SWP was taken over. The guy who runs the SWP is a guy named Jack Barnes, and Jack Barnes went to Cuba, with the Ford Foundation, and then he and 12 people, they took over the Socialist Workers' Party, and then they proceeded to demolish it and make it very, very, very small. And they maintain the World Socialist website, and you can buy this pamphlet on their website, Mehring Press, I believe it is. They maintain that the SWP is a front for American intelligence to spy on Cuba and to spy on North Korea, and that's what they maintain. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing this theory, but having spent some time with the SWP and seen how they conduct themselves, and also seeing that they are now a pro-Israel organization. The SWP used to get into fistfights with the Jewish Defense League. They used to get into fistfights with the JDL. I mean, years ago, if you went to an SWP bookstore, they would have baseball bats under the desks. And they said, why? Well, that's in case the Jewish Defense League shows up, because the pro-Israel people used to just come in with baseball bats. So they'd have to have their baseball bats to fight them. But now the SWP supports Israel, right? They actually are supporting Israel since October 7th. And that doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of things about the SWP that don't make any goddamn sense. Okay. And so what do you make of that? I don't know. But it's a little weird, and then, World Socialist website, who honestly, I'll tell you, a lot of their material I don't agree with on many, many issues. I think they're very weak, but they're Trotskyites. And they are a Trotskyite group that does take good stances on Julian Assange and good stances on a lot of things. And they are absolutely convinced that the SWP is a CIA-controlled organization, that they've basically turned into a vehicle for the U.S. government to spy on Cuba. I'm going to find a link to that pamphlet, right? I am going to find a link to that pamphlet. The Carrollton 12. Yeah, the Carrollton 12. Here it is. It's $5.95 from the World Socialist website, and they are adamant, and they make the case that they believe that the Pathfinder Press is a CIA entity. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no way of knowing. It's certainly weird that they support Israel right now. It's certainly weird how, they seem to echo the U.S. government on every issue, but yet for some reason they like North Korea and Cuba. That doesn't make any sense. The Cubans don't, support Israel. The North Koreans certainly don't. So what's going on here? That's pretty weird. And so I don't know what's going on, to tell you the truth. But, they argue. I will say, though, that this pamphlet, the Carrollton 12, which I read, and I got a lot out of it, it also says some other things that are pretty shady. For example, it claims that the American government cooperated with the KGB to kill Trotsky. I don't think that's true. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. It claims that certain people that were leaders of the SWP were in on the death of Trotsky. I don't think that's true. So, is it the case that the SWP might be a CIA front? They make a very strong case for. but then they kind of go off the deep end in the rest of the book. And that's why I don't want to necessarily endorse the theory, right? I've seen the way the SWP acts, and it's certainly sketch. And the fact that they own the rights to Malcolm X's actual writings and have made them hard to get, and the fact they support Israel, and the fact that they claim that they support Cuba, and they claim they support North Korea, and then their foreign policy views match the American government on every other issue, that's pretty damn weird. But what do I know? You know what I'm saying? I will say, I'll just throw this out there, right? If you read Out of the Movement to the Masses, I spend a really long time talking about the history of Trotskyism. I talk about Marxism, I talk about Michel Pablo and Pabloism and all of that. And you say, I'm totally anti-Trotsky at this point. I'm against Trotskyism. I think Trotsky and the Trotsky-Stalin divide was the very beginning of the synthetic left and all that. So why do I spend so much time talking about that? Well, it's important to know because the Trotskyite groups were kind of the original counter gangs, right? When you enter a period where you don't have mass political parties, you have little sects that are fanatical sects that carry out operations, right? And that's kind of the period that we live in, right? The Trotskyite groups, they were the first counter gangs, I guess. The communist parties, the official communist parties of countries were major political parties that, sought to build socialism in the country. But the Trotskyite groups were always counter gangs. They were modeled on being fanatical sects that carried out operations. And there were a couple Trotskyite groups that flipped and ended up on the right side. Very rare, but they existed. And the most obvious example is the followers of Sam Marcy. Sam Marcy was a Trotskyite, but he flipped. And he, in the name of being a true Trotskyist, he supported the socialist countries to the end. He aligned himself with all the communist groups. He was good friends with Joti Brar's father, Harpal Brar, I believe. They were friends at one. He went to all of his conferences and stuff. Sam Marcy was from the Trotskyite tradition. And he set up a group that was an isolated group of fanatics, what you might call a counter gang, the Workers' World Party. But he flipped. He went on the progressive side. And the same for Michel Pablo. Michel Pablo was another Trotskyite, a Greek leader of the Greek Trotskyites. And he flipped. And he ended up, and when Michel Pablo died, the Syrian government sent representatives to his funeral. The Iraqi government sent representatives to his funeral. And he was, at one point, a paid employee, a staffer of the governments of Algeria, the government of Syria, and the government of Iraq, right? Michel Pablo. And he was like 3 anti-imperialist governments were financing him. And he was working to build anti-colonial movements all over the world in coordination with 2 Ba'athist Arab socialist governments and 1 like revolutionary nationalist government in Algeria. He was on the right side. Michel Pablo, for very weird reasons, flipped and ended up building, and he led a counter gang and but he ended up on the right side. Jerry Healy is another example. Jerry Healy, Trot, big prominent British Trot, became a good friend of Gaddafi. He recruited Vanessa Redgrave, the actress. They made documentary films about the Palestinians. This movie, The Palestinians, that Vanessa Redgrave made. That was like the pro-Palestine film that was shown all over the world. It was called The Palestinians, Vanessa Redgrave. I'm trying to see if I can find you a clip of it. But it was a film about the Palestinian people and their struggle against imperialism. And it was shown all over the world. It was made by a Trotskyite, Vanessa Redgrave, and she was super pro-Palestine because she worked for Jerry Healy, and Jerry Healy was a Trot who flipped. And that, this is the whole thing about 4th generation warfare and non-state actors, right? They ultimately are loyal to themselves at the end of the day, right? If you read, William S. Lind and all of that, non-state actors, are, counter gangs, fanatical group, they're loyal to themselves and they serve their own interest. And that, for whatever reason, there's 3 Trots who ended up becoming anti-imperialists for whatever reason, for very strange reasons. You think about like the LaRouche movement was originally a Trot organization, the National Caucus of Labor Committees, the U.S. Labor Party. Now they stopped being Trots and they just became the LaRouche movement. And now they are very anti-imperialist, right? They're very good. Everything they write about China and the Belt and Road Initiative, Schiller Institute, everything they put out is great on current affairs. Not, and I wouldn't have said that in the 80s, but they flipped, so they're, and they, so that's why this is interesting. Unfortunately, we're in a period where, I would like us to eventually have a real mass working class movement in this country. And I don't want to create a counter gang, and I don't want to create an isolated sect, but I'm swimming, I was in the Workers' World Party for many years. And I was friendly for a while with the Schiller Institute people. And I mean, we're living in a time where counter gangs and sects are abundant, right? And if you do anti-imperialist work in America, you have to navigate a lot of counter gangs and sects. And so that's why studying Trotskyism is important, even though Trotsky himself was no good. And even though we reject the very premise of Trotskyism, the theory of permanent revolution, it's important to study how these groups operated, why they operated the way they did, the divisions within them, and understand them, because they occupied a political space that unfortunately we have been kind of exiled to. Right now, if you think the way we think, you're not in the mainstream of American politics, and that sucks. And we should aim for better than this, right? We should aim higher. We should want to have a mass movement that millions of Americans join. We should never accept, we're an isolated, we should never accept this kind of political exile. Unfortunately, though, in what they call this period of strategic defensive, when, revolutionary movements are not able to really flourish, we are exiled to the political fringe, and that political fringe space is occupied by counter gangs, sects, weird groups. I mean, there's really no other way to put it, right? And little tiny groups of fanatics that carry out operations, right? That are not intended to be mass, that are not intended to win millions of people over, but just kind of carry out operations, right? And that's where we currently exist. If we are doing this kind of work, if you want to free Julian Assange, well, Julian Assange is free now, but if you were part of the Free Assange movement, if you were, against sending weapons to Ukraine, if you want peace with North Korea, whatever, you have been kind of exiled from mainstream American politics into this fringe space. And so the question is, within this fringe space, how can you carry out operations successfully? So number one, just justify your ability to exist, right? I mean, if you just want to talk about this stuff, get on the internet and jabber about it all you want, right? But if you actually want to have a group, you have to carry out operations. You have to be useful to somebody. I mean, you have to serve some kind of purpose. People have to see that work is getting done and donate to you. And, you have to serve a purpose if you want to exist. But then, whatever purpose you serve should serve the ultimate aim of becoming a mass movement in your country, of actually leading millions of people, right? That ultimately should be your aim. You should never seek to operate you should never be thinking, we're going to be a fringe group for our entire existence, so how can we become kings of the fringe? No, right? The goal should be to eventually become the president, to eventually become the government of the country. If you want to wear a crown, you need to start acting like a king. Let me repeat that. If you want to wear a crown, you need to start acting like a king. You don't wait for the crown to show up and then start acting like a king. If you want to wear the crown, you need to start acting like a king. And so we should never accept being a fringe organization. We should never accept being a small sect, we should never accept that. Unfortunately, political circumstances in the period we're in has forced us into a position where we're in the but we don't want to be there. We don't want to be in the protest cage. We're out of the movement to the masses. And the main thing that we should keep in mind as a result of that is that we should never be looking for the approval or clout or acceptance of the people in the exiled political fringe. You have to find people that you can work with, carry out joint operations, get things done, and that's totally respectable. But I decided a long time ago, I don't give a damn what people in the so-called socialist left think, because being the king of them, dominating their spaces, is number one, not that hard to do. Number two, not worth doing. Okay? And, at the end of the day, I don't want to be the king of socialism in America. I want to defeat imperialism. And that is going to require me to do things that are going to piss off people that are attracted to this fringe, isolated socialist movement. Right? And that's a weird revelation to come to. But if we really want to win and we really want to stop imperialism, that comes at the expense of satisfying anti-imperialists, of satisfying fringe elements, right? So, I mean, anyway, this is a long ramble. Maybe what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. But anyway, maybe you get this. There's a reason that I look into these things and study them. And I think we need to study the history of Trotskyism because that's the sea we're swimming in. But we should not aim to get stuck in that space. And we should not seek these people's validation. Anyway, next question. What is your favorite non-political movie or TV show of all time? Omar, I've said on here many, many times that when I was a teenager, my favorite movies were the Hammer films, right? The horror movies created by Hammer Film Productions, often starring Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing. I absolutely loved those films. And Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed was my favorite of all of those films. And I've shown the trailer of that film on here. Terrence Fisher's 1969 classic film was my favorite by far. And, you know, I am at the point where I honestly, when I revisit that film, I don't like it as much as I once did. I think I'm much more bothered by the violence in the film. I think as you get older, right, and as you've been in, you know, situations where people get hurt and stuff, that violence is much more scary. I think like little babies, you know, it's like the cartoons, right? The violent cartoons that kids watch and stuff. It's almost like, you know, when you're little, you're like, you haven't lived as much life, so violence isn't as scary to you. But as you get older, violent things are not as entertaining. You're like, ooh, that's violence. And I look at the Hammer films now, and I'm like, actually, I don't. There's a little bit too much blood and gore there for my liking. So, you know, I wouldn't stand by what I had said before about liking the Hammer films because my views have shifted, you know, to some degree or other. But as far as you're talking about non-political movies that I like, I'll tell you this much. I will say Baz Luhrmann, right, is this film director, and I watched his movie that he made of The Great Gatsby, and I absolutely loved it with Leonardo DiCaprio. Amazing. And I watched his movie about the life of Elvis Presley, and I absolutely loved it. It was absolutely amazing. And I think there's a couple other films that Baz Luhrmann has made that I really enjoyed. It's something about the way he builds up to a climax, the way the music is played, the way the light. I mean, he's a very skilled director. I like what that man does, aesthetically speaking. I really like what Baz Luhrmann does. I know, I think he's right. He's a Zionist, right? Isn't he? He's a big supporter of Israel. And I mean, I don't agree with him politically. And his films are not great politically. He's Australian. You know, but his films are very, very, very well made. And they pack kind of an emotional punch. And you can tell when he made the film because they have a kind of, you know, aesthetic quality to them that is very, very powerful. So, you know, I really liked his Elvis movie, and I really, really liked his Great Gatsby movie. I really enjoyed both of those films aesthetically. They were both amazing. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I hope that's helpful. You know, but there you go. All right. Okay. All right. And please, any more super chats people got, you know, the night is young. It's only 10:05. I've got at least 2 more hours in me. So just keep the super chats running. I'm here to answer your questions. What's wrong with Maoism - third worldism? And that is a question that I have answered before many times on these streams, but I will answer once again. So first of all, right, those two words don't always necessarily go together. All right. Mao was the leader of the socialist revolution in China. Mao is going to be remembered as probably one of the most influential leaders in human history. He's on the level of a Julius Caesar. He's on the level of Alexander the Great. he's on the level of, Napoleon. He's on the level of Winston Churchill. Like, Mao Zedong, if you look at what China used to be, and you look at what China is now, Mao started that. One of the fastest and biggest turnarounds that a major country has ever had, from being the sick man of Asia to being what it is, what it is today. Mao Zedong did that. And China is a huge country in terms of population. It's way bigger than the United States, right? I mean, you're talking, 1/4 of humanity. So the amount of political brilliance that it would take to do what Mao Zedong did is on a level that none of us can understand. Mao knew his people, the Chinese people, very well. Very, very well. And Mao also understood how to make alliances with people, how to get shit done on a level that all of us can only dream of, okay? Mao Zedong, love him or hate him, even if you think he's Satan, all right? Say you accept that he's the most evil thing that's ever existed. He's still brilliant, okay? And Mao Zedong is going to be remembered by history as one of the most important figures who's ever lived. Mao is a genius on a scale. I mean, nobody knew their own people anywhere. I mean, we don't know the Americans as well as Mao knew the Chinese people. He knew the heart and soul of his people, and he knew how to organize people. This was Mao Zedong was the most, probably in the 20th century, he's probably the greatest mass organizer of the 20th century. He built a movement that took the largest country in the world in terms of population and completely shifted it. So you have to just kind of be in awe of Mao. And that said, the political movement that claims his name is a joke. All right? The Chinese Communist Party, they don't talk about Maoism. They talk about Marxist-Leninist ideology and Mao Zedong thought. Right? They don't even say it's an ideology. They have the Marxist-Leninist ideology, and then they have Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, Xi Jinping thought. They have their own ideology. They don't even call it Maoism in China. Right? Maoism is not a thing. Right? There is Marxism-Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought is the application of Marxism-Leninism to Chinese conditions, and it is a variety of methods and tactics that Mao developed that you can, if you read On Contradiction, if you read the report to the peasant on the peasant uprisings in the Hunan province, if you read, I mean, the method that Mao had for organizing people, for teaching people, for struggling with people, that's what Mao Zedong thought is. And that's brilliant. And Mao originally was an alternate member of the KMT, the party in Taiwan that fled to Taiwan, the Chinese Nationalist Party. Mao was an alternate member of their national committee. He joined the KMT. Mao knew Chiang Kai-shek. Mao gave military training to Chiang Kai-shek. Mao and Chiang Kai-shek went to the same military academy. The Chinese communists were forced out of the KMT government. And then when Japan invaded, they waged a civil war against the KMT government. They set up the Chinese Soviet Republic. Then Japan invaded China, and then they dissolved the Chinese Soviet Republic, merged with the KMT to fight the Japanese invaders. Then afterwards, they tried to have a coalition government with the KMT, and that didn't work. And when the KMT tried to take their guns away, they said, we're not giving up our guns. They waged a civil war against the KMT, and then the KMT wrecked the economy of China. And then even some of the richest people were like, okay, Mao's better than this. And Mao cut a deal with a lot of the richest people in the KMT government, and they switched sides and they came over to him, and Mao ended up founding the People's Republic of China in 1949. 25 years of armed civil war. I mean, Mao is a genius on levels we can't even understand. And he knew how to get shit done in politics. And people in America who call themselves Maoists don't know about any of that. They have not read biographies of Mao. They have not studied his methods and his teachings. They just have a fetish for him because he had a gun, because a lot of his slogans emphasize violence, right? Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, armed struggle. They love him because he was violent. He led a violent revolution. He had a gun. A lot of people had guns. A lot of people have guns. A lot of people do violent things. That's not the essence of what Mao was. If all Mao was a guy with a gun, we would not know about him. And they love him because he had a gun. They love him because Black Panthers, who also had guns, waved him around. They love him because he had cut ties with the Soviet Union. And they love him because, to be a Maoist now, you're not aligned with China because they've sold out. You're not aligned with Cuba or North Korea or any existing communist governments. You can just be this fantasy thing. They love the Cultural Revolution, which that was very much, Mao did that. And I think the Cultural Revolution was awful. And it was one of the greatest, he thought it was one of the greatest things he ever did. I think it was one of the greatest mistakes. And it was a disaster. The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. I admire Mao on a number of levels. I do not admire the Cultural Revolution. I think that was a very, very evil thing. It ended up really going in a very bad direction. But a lot of people in the West idealize Mao for very, very stupid and ignorant reasons. And they don't get the essence of who he really was. If you want to know who Mao really, really was, I recommend you read, Han Suyin. Sorry, goodness gracious. Han Suyin wrote The Morning Deluge, right? This is a biography of Mao. It'll tell you who Mao really was. It gets into the personality of Mao Zedong. This is a great book. Go read The Morning Deluge. Anyway. So that said, the question is, what's wrong with Maoism third worldism? So Maoism third worldism is a particular brand of Western people who worship and idealize Mao Zedong that says that white people in America have no revolutionary potential because they are benefiting from imperialism. It takes what Lenin wrote about the labor aristocracy and argues that all white people in Western countries are beneficiaries of imperialism. And so therefore you cannot have a revolution in a Western country because people are too comfortable. People's lives are too comfortable in the Western countries. And so organizing a revolutionary movement in the Western countries is completely hopeless. And instead, all we can do is try and build some kind of solidarity with the third world movement. And it's doomerism. And it is very much the ideology of internet communist teenagers, internet communist edgelords, people that become communists because they're mad at the society they live in. They don't fit in. And communism is their way to be different than everybody else. And they don't even want to join a communist group, right? The communist groups are already fringe and isolated. No. That's not even worth it. They just want to just be isolated on the internet. There's a book that is called Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat by Jay Sakai. It's quite popular in those crowds. Now, I know some of them claim that they have a different interpretation. They reject Sakaiism, or I don't care, right? It is based on the premise that the bulk of the working class and the bulk of the people in the Western countries have no revolutionary potential. So you can't organize them, and you shouldn't try to build a socialist movement among them. Instead, you should just build some kind of movement. You should do things that will enable the third world to eventually win. It's very pessimistic. It's very defeatist. And it's an excuse not to organize. It's an excuse to celebrate your isolation. It's an excuse to just be mad at the society you live in. And in this time, it's particularly dangerous because it's anti-populism, right? It views it. They view any mass movement of workers in the Western countries as a mass movement to intensify imperialism. Maoist third worldists, they're famously, against, here's one example, hotel workers strike in Southern California, right? All these hotel workers in Southern California go on strike. They're against it. Why are they against it? They're against it because of the fact that, oh, well, these are first world workers and they're going to extract more from the third world. Well, actually, hotel workers in Southern California tend to be Latino, and they tend to send money home. And actually, if they get higher wages, they're going to send more money back to Mexico and back to, I mean, it is an abstentionist ideology, right? And it's an ideology that says that we should never join any mass movement of working people, and it's anti-populism, and it's not helpful. What we need now, more than anything, is the opposite. We need the politics of Huey Long. We need the politics of Gus Hall. We need, what I was talking about in the opening of my stream. Maoism, third worldism is the opposite of that. It is a pessimistic, hopeless view that views the West as all the people in the West, even black people, not even just white people. And some interpretations, they say black people are also, no good. Black people are also labor aristocrats. The bulk of the working class in the West, all the people in the West benefit from imperialism, and they're all evil, collaborators with imperialism. And so the only hope is eventually the West collapses and the third world invades and blah, 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 blah. That's Maoism, third worldism. And it's not helpful. It's a cancer, and it's against organizing. So there you go. It is against building a mass movement. What we need now is populism. We need to be like Mao. Mao knew his people. He knew the Chinese people. We need to know the American people. Mao loved the Chinese people. We need to love the American people. Mao was so good at knowing his people and knowing their aspirations and knowing how to organize his people that he could build a mass movement to break his country out of imperialism. We need to be so good at organizing our people. We need to love our people so much that we can break them out of this dying system that is driving us into wars and rebuild a new America for working families. We need to have love for our people. Real revolutionary leaders are motivated by feelings of great love, as Che Guevara said. We need to love our people. We need to love our country. We need to love our communities. We need to be so full of love and understanding. And so we need to know our people like better than we know ourselves and organize them to save our country from the nightmare it's in. And if we're not doing that, we're not serious about politics. And that, people are asking me about a lot of different communist stuff in America. And a lot of it is people that what made Mao so successful is that Mao knew his people and loved his people and was really good at organizing his people. And if you are building any kind of serious mass movement in your country, that's what you need. That's what you need. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, if you're not doing that, if you're not motivated by love for your people, love for your country, love for your community, and you're not motivated, you don't know your people and know how to get them done, what are you doing in politics, right? And a lot of these silly American forms of leftism are excuses not to do that. And Maoism, third worldism, whatever you want to call it, is one of those. Okay. I'm sorry about the allergies, folks. I'm just... Next question. Was Manson used by the CIA to ruin counterculture? That's not how I would put it. I would definitely not put it that way. There is a best-selling book, which I've got on my shelf here somewhere, that I really learned a lot from. It was, it was a best-selling book. I mean, it's not some fringe screed. I mean, it is a best-selling book about the connections between Charles Manson and the CIA, and what the book shows, and it goes to a great deal of research. I believe it's by O'Neill. It's called like Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 1960s. I have it somewhere. It's a very, very, yeah, here it is. Hold on. This book is very, very good. And this book is very carefully researched. It's from a major publisher. Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, the Secret History of the 60s. And basically what this book shows is that Charles Manson was a lifelong habitual criminal, a juvenile delinquent, whatever. And he ended up in federal prison, in a federal institution rather than a state prison. And in the federal institution, they began giving him hallucinogens to see what the impact was. And when he was paroled out of prison, he was in California, and they were continuing to give him hallucinogens and studying the effect of hallucinogens on him. And that the little tiny group that he created, it was like, I think it was like 14 people tops. I mean, it wasn't some huge mass movement or something. It was like he had a little group of drug addicts who worked with him. Most of them women, but some men also. He had this little, like, I don't know what you call it, gang, basically. He was a criminal. He had this little gang of drug addicts and drug dealers who worked with him. And they were in Hollywood, and they lived on a movie set, right? They lived in this ranch, right, that was used in cowboy movies. They lived there. They rented it from an old man who owned it, and it was used. And they lived there, and they sold drugs, and they went out and they sold drugs, and they dumpster dived, and they were just grimy, dirty, criminal, drug dealing people. And but they were in Hollywood. Hollywood is obviously a very, very, very important town for the world. I mean, that's the center of the film industry. And he was just this criminal drug dealer in Hollywood who was being given drugs by the CIA's MK Ultra program, and they were monitoring him, right? And that his parole hearings, he would go back for his parole check-ins, were being done. They weren't being done at a regular parole office. They were being done at a clinic where they were testing the impact of the drugs on him. So the CIA was experimenting with drugs. They had given him drugs in prison to see what would happen. And when he got out of prison and started his little gang, he was frequently going back to a CIA clinic and getting drugs. And what the book shows is that the reason that we all know who Charles Manson is because he murdered Sharon Tate. There was a famous actress named Sharon Tate. And he gave an address to his followers, his gang, his group of drug addicted criminals, and he gave them this address. He said, go to this address and kill everyone there. So they did. And what this book maintains is that he did not know that Sharon Tate lived there. He thought that was the home of a rival drug dealer, because apparently before Sharon Tate had moved in at this house, another drug dealer lived there. He thought he was murdering a rival drug dealer. He actually ended up murdering a famous Hollywood actress. And so his followers showed up at this house and they killed Sharon Tate and the other people in the house. Very gruesome way. And then the book shows that there was a guy in Hollywood who is known to be an intelligence agent. He was a CIA agent. And that guy knew Charles Manson because he knew everybody in Hollywood. He was an intelligence officer who was posing as a socialite. He was just this rich guy, this guy who liked to go to parties, and he would go to wild parties with Hollywood people. But he wasn't just a socialite. He was an intelligence officer. And his job was to go around Hollywood partying with celebrities and know all the businessmen and just kind of keep track of everybody in Hollywood. So after Sharon Tate was killed by Charles Manson, this CIA agent showed up to the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, right? And showed up to the prosecutor's office and said, all right, here's the script. And they made up this whole story about Helter Skelter, and he wanted to start a race war, and they made up a whole thing where Charles Manson was like the face of an evil hippie, and they made up this whole thing. And that is not really what happened. Charles Manson was a drug-addicted criminal who was known to American intelligence, and he accidentally murdered a film star, and then the CIA had a narrative that they wanted to run with, and so they used that narrative for political reasons to justify Richard Nixon's kind of clamp down on the Black Panthers and other things, right? That for propaganda purposes, They ran with the story of Charles Manson, the evil hippie who ran this weird psychedelic cult who wanted to start World War III. But in reality, Charles Manson was just, a drug addicted criminal who was trying to kill a rival drug dealer and was really not that notable. And I would say I tend to believe what's written in this book because I've watched the interviews with Charles Manson. He can't be the evil genius they make him out to be. He's dumb as a box of rocks, right? You watch the interviews with him. He cannot get out a coherent sentence. The interviews, he did interviews, and for years they would do big primetime interviews, every late night show. Oh, we had 60 Minutes interviews Charles Manson. And this was allowed to go on. If he was some kind of evil genius who had some kind of ideology or something, he didn't. He would sit there and he's just like, I'm drunk, and he would ramble like he was an idiot. He was a drug-addicted, habitual criminal idiot, okay? He wasn't the mastermind of evil. He wasn't, Satan incarnate. He wasn't some evil, maniacal, and he's none of that. He was just an idiot. He was a drug-addicted, criminal idiot, okay? Yeah, the amount of people who think Manson is smart in the YouTube. Exactly. It's like, look at the interviews. Pull up any of the interviews. He's a blathering idiot. And he was the way he lived. If this guy was at all intelligent, he would have at least lived. They were living in like utter squalor, right? In this ranch, this ranch they lived on in downtown Hollywood or whatever. And they were living in complete and utter squalor. I think he would send his followers out to go dumpster dive and bring like rotten food out of dumpsters that they would eat, right? He was a lumpen, drug-addicted criminal who just happened to be in a very strategic place, Hollywood, at a very strategic time, and it looks like he accidentally killed a movie star. He didn't even have, you'd think, some loser, some drug-addicted criminal wants to be famous, they kill a movie star. No, he accidentally killed a movie star, thinking he was killing a rival drug dealer. And then for propaganda reasons, the American government and the CIA jumped on that and made it what it is. And that's what Tom O'Neill maintains in this book. And I am tempted to believe that is the case. That fits what I know. I learned a lot from this book, I must say. Right. And that this book isn't some fringe conspiracy thing. This book is a major publisher. This is a best-selling book. This was endorsed by a lot of very prominent people. And I think this book was probably what they call a limited hangout. I think American intelligence probably arranged for this book to be published. That's what I would argue. Because this book basically targets Nixon. Nixon is the bad guy, right? And it's basically like, this book kind of lets the liberal CIA off the hook. It talks about Project MKUltra, but it makes the CIA sound like they're all a bunch of Nixon supporters. And this book, to me, it looks like, I think that Tom O'Neill, I suspect that somehow the intelligence agencies enabled Tom O'Neill to write this book and enabled him to get the publicity around this book. And I think that this is what they do, right? The intelligence crowd, generally what they do is that they, after they do bad things, they want to be the one, they want you to hear about it from them, right? They would rather you hear about it from them than hear about it from some foreign government or from some anti-imperialist or whatever. So what they do is 30, 40 years after they do the evil thing, they find somebody in the press to publish a very watered down version of what they did. That's what happens, right? And so if you look at it, I suspect this book was enabled to be what it was by American intelligence. And the reason that I also think that the Trump crowd, they idealize Richard Nixon. Trump very clearly idealizes Richard Nixon. He talks about the silent majority. He talks about, I'm the law and order president. So Trump and his people, Roger Stone, they admire Richard Nixon. And so the liberal CIA arranged for a version of the Charles Manson events where it was the evil Nixon administration that lied to the American people and created the myth of Charles Manson, which is, I'm not saying that didn't happen. They make a very convincing case that that's what happened. They enabled that version of what happened to get out there. Okay. I don't know what happened. And this guy, Tom O'Neill, spent years and years and years putting this book together and did meticulous research. And he's an investigative journalist. And this is, I mean, it's a very impressive book with a lot of very interesting information that basically everything you think you knew about Charles Manson is wrong, right? That he was not trying to start World War III, that Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor who wrote the book Helter Skelter and became like this big prominent politician in Los Angeles, was a lying sack of shit and a mentally ill bully and a sociopath, right? And he shows that Vincent Bugliosi, is the prosecutor, is the guy who wrote Helter Skelter. He prosecuted Charles Manson, convicted Charles Manson, and he eventually, he worked on the O.J. Simpson case, and he was just this very, very big deal prosecutor in California. And that guy, according to Tom O'Neill, was a liar, a habitual liar, and was like convinced that his wife was having an affair with the milkman, right? The man who delivered milk, and like went to the school that the milkman's kids went to and harassed the milkman, like engaged in this crazy behavior because he was convinced that his wife was cheating on him with the milkman. Like, Vincent Bugliosi, who is the guy who made the Charles Manson story that Tom O'Neill maintains is fiction, made that famous. Tom O'Neill maintains that guy is not credible at all. And that, so I don't know. That's what I would I suspect this was the liberal CIA trying to demonize the Trump, the Trump wing of the CIA, the conservative wing of the CIA, the pro-Nixon wing of the American political establishment. So they published a limited hangout. And that, the official story of Manson is a big part of neocon identity, right? I mean, to be fair, right? When we talk about neoconservatives, the neoconservative identity is blowback from the 1960s counterculture, right? It's the idea is that, the 1950s was this great time when everyone loved their country and wholesome, good American values, but gosh, the darn civil rights movement and the darn hippie counterculture ruined it. But thank goodness, luckily, thanks to Richard Nixon and then Ronald Reagan, we got our country back. That's the neocon narrative. And Charles Manson, the evil satanic hippie who wanted to, who wanted to start a race war or whatever, is a big part of that narrative. And so sinking that narrative would fit what the liberal CIA is trying to do, right? I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're trying to take apart the narrative of people, it fits, right? And I honestly wonder, and I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. I feel like I know what Trump supporters believe. I feel like I know what liberals believe. I live in New York City, so of course I know what liberals believe. But I'm curious what like conservative FBI agents believe. And I'm curious what conservative CIA agents believe. And I'm starting to realize that in a lot of cases, what you and I believe is not really as important as what people within the deep state believe, and that they have different beliefs, and that this book, it could be aimed at the conservative CIA. It could be aimed at people in the FBI who would be Trump supporters, right? Because the people in the FBI who support Trump are probably the people in the FBI who still admire Richard Nixon. And, this book could be aimed at people in the CIA. People in the CIA who are Trump supporters are probably people who admire Richard Nixon. And that this book, it may not be aimed at you and I. It may be aimed at people in the deep state, that the myth of Charles Manson is essential to them believing in what their agency does, right? Because the FBI, I mean, everyone knows they did COINTELPRO. Everybody knows that. COINTELPRO, they did that. Well, what do you do about that? Well, I mean, the answer of the bulk of the American deep state is they're having this truth and reconciliation moment where they're kind of going, oops, yeah, we were really nasty to the Black Panthers. Oops, we were really nasty to Martin Luther King. But there's always been a layer in the FBI, at least from what I can gather, that doesn't feel that way, that says we did what we had to do. We protected America from communism, right? That is, there's always been a layer of people in the FBI who believe that. I assume. I don't know. Okay. How would I know? But I assume that while the bulk of the FBI is going, okay, we're apologizing for COINTELPRO. Okay, we did some really nasty racist shit back in the day. That's not an easy thing for a lot of FBI people to hear, right? You got to remember, I mean, a lot of these people were probably trained by the very people that did those operations, right? And so there's confusion in the deep state right now. And Donald Trump's Make America Great Again, Donald Trump's I'm not going to apologize for America. There's aspects of Trump, if you listen to what he says, he's talking to like 12 different people when Trump talks, right? And that's how modern politics is. You're never just talking to one group. You're talking to like 12 groups. You're talking to 45 groups. I feel like, well, anyway, I could ramble about this all night, but, and keep asking questions, folks. But yeah, this book is good. And it doesn't say that Manson was used by the CIA to ruin counterculture. It says that what Charles Manson actually did is really not that notable, but intelligence agencies used him to create a narrative that served Richard Nixon and served the crackdown on the new left and the Black Panthers. And I think that's probably correct, but it's not the whole story, and it was put out there for political purposes at this time. And I think this book was probably published to target Trump. That is my suspicion. I suspect this book was probably put out to rally people within the FBI and within the deep state to not buy into a narrative that those among them that are Trump supporters probably believe. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. All right. Saw a flyer for Revolutionary Communists of America. What's your take on RCA? Okay, I've talked about this before, but it's a good question, right? Fits kind of the way this Q&A is going tonight. So Revolutionary Communists of America is the rebrand. They used to be called the International Marxist Tendency, and they have recently rebranded as the Revolutionary Communists of America, and it's weird. They are suddenly this Trotskyite group that was just this weird Trotskyite group that comes from England originally. They've always been around. They're just one of the various communist groups that you see in the United States. They're really into labor unions. They're really into Trotsky t-shirts, and they're, whatever. They sell pamphlets, whatever. I think they're followers of Alan Woods, and they're followers of, but out of the blue, you see most of the communist groups in America are fading into nothing right now, which is weird, right? You would think they'd be growing, but they're fading into nothing, except out of the blue, RCA has loads of money all of a sudden, and they are getting a lot of publicity from mainstream media, and they're just out there, and their message has changed to, we're communists, woo, communism, yay, and they just wave red flags, and they've got big hammers and sickles, the Soviet symbol, and they don't support any existing communist government, and they, but they're, they're out there waving big hammers and sickles everywhere and all that. Jenny Lynn has it right. They glow like a light bulb. Something's going on here. And I don't know exactly what it is, but there's some kind of intelligence, something going on here. I'm telling you that. And it could be that, as part of the Trump blowback, they want to create the narrative. That's what Trump people think, that everything they don't like is communism. Okay? So it's very interesting to have a group of people that are out there going, woo, communism, but they can't explain anything about communism. Their literature is completely blank. And they don't support the Soviet Union. They don't support Stalin. They don't support any communism, anything. But they're out there with the big symbol, the big scary hammer and sickle that everyone thinks is communism. They're out there with the red flag, and they're just out there creating a spectacle around communism. It is sketchy and weird as hell. That's all I can say about it. And if I was you, I would stay 100 miles away from it. I am at the point where maybe 5 or 10 years ago, communism wasn't as out there. And so if you called yourself a communist, you could lead people in a good direction. Nowadays, there's a lot of people that are interested in communism that are doing a lot of not good things. I'm at the point, I don't call myself a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist, and we are ideologically, we are builders. We are anti-imperialist. We are not, we want to build and construct. We don't have the negative vibe. I believe in God. We've taken things in a different direction. So we're calling it innovationism at this point because, we're not what most Americans think communism is, and we're not what most communists think communism is. We are our own thing. And I got to tell you, there are people that are still doing the, we are the communists and trying to own communism. But of all of the people doing this, this is sketch and weird as hell. And a lot of other people have noticed it. I'm not the only one to have noticed it. It's weird. This is not who this group used to be. This group didn't used to be like this. And they just suddenly rebrand, and now they're just out there going, woo, communism. And it is sketch and weird as hell, and they're everywhere. And you see their literature everywhere, and like in the middle of nowhere, and like, small towns in rural America, you'll find their posters up everywhere. It's extremely weird. It is extremely weird, and I expect that there is some kind of intelligence angle. And whether this is they're the boogeyman that Trump can point to, there's a group of communists. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Something's not right. Okay. And this is sketch and weird as hell. And I think it's more than just a group is doing a PR boom, a PR stunt. I think it's more than that, right? This is a very marginal communist organization that suddenly has completely changed its image and blown up to be a caricature of what communists are and is lacking any political substance. It's weird as hell. That's my assessment. It's very, very strange and weird as hell. Someone pointed out to me that this group is tied to anti-Iranian government operations. That this group, is involved in protests in Iran to destabilize Iran. And that the group has been, they have an affiliate in Iran that has been like subsidized by people in the West that is working with the CIA against the Iranian government. I don't know what to make of that, and there's been other aspects of it that's been pointed out to me. I don't know what to make of it, but my advice would be don't touch this with a 10-foot pole. And again, we're a month out from the election. Be very, very, very careful of January 6th like events, right? Really, I would advise you if suddenly there's a bunch of people are going to storm the Capitol or something, stay the hell away from that. Don't get caught up in a January 6th like sting on the left or the right, right? I would advise you to be very, very careful in these next few months, right? Things, I assume, will get back to some level of political normality after this election. Alhamdulillah, as they say, with God's will. That would be nice. It'd be nice for me to know about a lot of things. A lot of things in my life are quite insecure right now. I don't know what's going on with my job. I don't know about a lot of things, but I'm just doing the best I can and trying to be a good anti-imperialist and trying to stand up for what I know is right. And, hopefully I'm back doing my job soon. Legally that can be worked out. And hopefully there's a lot of things that are on my mind right now. But my advice is for the next month or whatever, my advice is try to avoid any place where you might get set up. Don't get played in the next few months. That's my advice. Don't get played. Don't get entrapped in the next few months. And don't lead yourself into a situation that, that could have serious consequences. Try to just get through this next few months. You and I are not going to change the election results, right? We're not going to influence the election. We're not going to change the election results. So, all right, whatever happens, happens. Who I think people should vote for. You know what my opinion is, but, I'm not going to change the election results. So there we go. All right. Tennessee's National Guard just deployed 700 soldiers to Israel. Wow. Hundreds may be dead in North Carolina with no immediate assistance. Wow. Wow. I'm sure that's what those guys in Tennessee signed up for, right? They signed up to leave Americans devastated while they go and fight for some foreign government. I mean, it's infuriating. It really is infuriating. And we should be making those very kind of arguments. Miss Richie Blackmore, you have got a very good point. And that is how we should be approaching the American people. That's what we need to be saying to them. Not America is an evil, racist country, just like Israel, and you're all a bunch of evil, racist Americans. We give you the middle finger. USA, go to hell. No. How about this? That a bunch of guys from Tennessee, working class guys who love their country, all have families, have moms and dads, have kids, are now risking their lives on the other side of the world for a government that, doesn't care about human rights and really doesn't respect us here in America. And meanwhile, those guys are needed just a few states over in North Carolina, where so many working people have been left without. That is what should be on the front page. That is the way we should frame it. That why are National Guardsmen in Israel when Americans need their help in North Carolina? That's the way you should tell that to your family members. You should tell that to your classmates. You should tell that to your coworkers. You should tell that to your neighbors. Why are American National Guard helping out Israel when we need them in North Carolina? You nailed it. All right. Who are the neocons? Were they actually Trotskyites? Okay, I could, I've got a lot more super chats to get through, and this is one of the things I could talk about all night, and I'm not going to do that because I've talked about this in great depth on various previous streams. So I'm giving you the short answer. The short answer is Leon Trotsky cut ties with the Soviet Union. He was a leader of the Russian Revolution, but he had a falling out with the Soviet Union, and he moved to France and he moved to Mexico, and he had his own following of people that were communists but were against the Soviet Union. He recruited a group of people who lived in New York City, and they were called the New York Intellectuals. And they were largely people of Jewish descent who were college professors and writers and intellectuals who lived in New York City in the 1930s. And they were his followers. The leader of them was a guy named Max Shachtman. There was another guy named James Burnham. There was another guy named Martin Aburn. There was three of them: Shachtman, Aburn, and Burnham. Right. And they led a group of, it was a couple hundred people. They were called the New York Intellectuals, and they were Trotskyists. But then 1939, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler. And these guys, they said that meant the Soviet Union could not be any good at all. Trotsky said that he supported the Soviet Union. He just didn't like Stalin. He didn't like the leaders. He said the Soviet Union was what he called a deformed workers' state. Well, these guys, the New York Intellectuals, said after Stalin signed a treaty with Hitler, they said, oh, no, the Soviet Union can't be a deformed workers' state anymore. They said it was state capitalism. They said it was bureaucrat collectivism. They said it was a new system that was neither capitalist or socialist, but was like a mixture. It was the rule of the world by managers and the managerial revolution. They called it all kinds of different stuff, but it wasn't socialism. And Trotsky had a big fight with them, and it got really ugly, and they all quit the Trotskyist movement. And they started, they for a while they had the Workers' Party, and then they had the Independent Socialist League, and they had the Independent Socialist Club, and eventually they became Democrats. And then they were so pro-Israel that they supported Ronald Reagan when Ronald Reagan was in, because Ronald Reagan was anti-Soviet and pro-Israel, and so they liked Ronald Reagan. And it was a crew of people called, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know what you want to call them. It was a group of people that you call the New York Intellectuals, and they were all very much tied in with the Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA. There was a magazine called Partisan Review magazine that they all wrote for, which was some kind of anti-communist, leftist magazine, and and there's books about them and stuff. And it was a crowd of intellectuals who lived in New York City who went from being Trotskyites to being conservatives, and their views changed. That's really all there is to it. I mean, is neoconservatism a big Trotskyite conspiracy? No, it's not. It's just there's a certain group of people who, they were doing the Trotskyism thing in the late 1930s. And then they became liberals in the 1950s and were working with the CIA. And then by the 80s, they were Republicans, and they were anti-communist conservatives. That term "deformed workers' state" is so derogatory. It makes me suspicious of where it came from. Apparently, there was an old cartoon, of I don't know, it was making fun of Trotskyites, and it says they say that China is a deformed workers' state, and they show a bunch of like workers with deformities. I don't know. I don't know. It's just is it a deformed workers' state or a degenerated workers' state? I don't know. I think maybe the Soviet Union is a degenerated workers' state because it was once a healthy workers' state, and then China and all the other communist countries are deformed worker states, and then some of them say it's bureaucrat collectivism, and then some of them say it's state capitalism. I don't know. It's Trotskyism. This is what I told you. I've studied Trotskyism, and I think it's important to study as we try to figure out, building groups and all of that, because those people, when it comes to building sects and counter gangs and all of that, that's Trotskyism in a nutshell. That's what they all do. And so, yeah, I've read all that stuff, and the Spartacist League is a Trotskyite group, and they actually wrote a very, very good article about why China is not capitalist and not imperialist. And I shared that article on this stream last night because it's really good. It's a really good article, and I'll share it again. Honestly, I'm not pro Trotsky, but of all the articles that I have read about why China is not capitalist, this was the best one I've ever read. It's really well written. It's a really coherent argument about why China is not capitalist. So there we go. Sorry for the, allergies. But there we go. So enjoy it. I actually really enjoyed this article. Makes really good points about why China is not capitalist, why Saudi Arabia is capitalist, but China isn't. It's good stuff, right? That article is how I got the term on my mind. There you go. You've been trot-brained, Rachel. You've been trot-brained. So there you go. But there we go. All right. Thank you, Aaron. Much appreciated. And thanks again. Much appreciated. All right. We're getting down to, there's 2 remaining super chats. And then there's a Rumble rant from Penny. Okay. All right. 2 remaining super chats and a Rumble rant from Penny. All right. So first one, thoughts on Dr. James David Manning. I haven't heard of him. Who's Dr. James David Manning? Is running for mayor of New York City, right? So, right, our mayor here in New York City is on the brink of stepping down because he's been indicted. He's been indicted by the I'm sorry. He's been indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice for corruption and allegedly being, an agent of Turkey. They're using this foreign agent stuff like insane right now. But I guess they're alleging that the mayor of New York City was bribed by Turkey or something, and he's stepping down. And the whole thing is sketch to me. I think he's just too pro-Trump. He's a Democrat, but in New York City, there's still a pro-Trump faction of the Democrats. He would be a Republican anywhere else, but the NYPD, the New York Post, that's where you find the Trumpian wing of the New York political establishment, and that's Eric Adams. And he came in and he got rid of the vaccine mandates, and he returned what do you call it? He returned Rikers Island, the solitary confinement. He restored that. He was the pro NYPD guy. Bill de Blasio, the previous president, was very anti-NYPD and very anti-Trump. Eric Adams came in. He's a Democrat, but he's the police department guy. He's a subtly pro-Trump mayor. And I think he was too pro-Trump. And that's what I think is happening. And I think that, I think it really just gets down to that. That's why they're getting rid of him. So now this pastor, James David Manning, who runs all the land anointed holy. He runs a church in Harlem. Very interesting. An anti-Obama black preacher from Harlem. Very interesting. I am going to look into that, Dunkachino. That is a very, very interesting question. I don't know what's going on there. And that is really interesting. I'm going to look into this guy. This guy sounds like quite a character. And I know people that do religious work in Harlem. I am going to investigate this. Thank you, Duncachino, for pointing me into that. I'm going to look into this. I'm going to ask people about this. I bet there's a story there. I'm curious. All right. What are some good books to get the basis of ML theory? One great book is called The Foundations of Marxism-Leninism. It is an old Soviet textbook, The Foundations of Marxism-Leninism. I would read that. That's a great book. And honestly, I would urge you, before you read the classics, I would encourage you to, or the fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism, it's called, right? I would urge you to read a textbook first, because the classics are all polemics. They're arguments. And if you don't know the contexts of the arguments, you are going to be lost. So read The Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism, which is a Soviet textbook. I would, if you really want to just learn everything, I would read that, right? The Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism is a great place to start. I would also recommend you read The History of the Three Internationals. History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster, which is, that book, I tell people, and it is like the greatest. I mean, if you really want to understand Marxism-Leninism, read The History of the Three Internationals, right? And that'll tell you everything you need to know. You learn about the First International, the Second International, and the Third International, and World War II, and the Common Forum, the Communist Information Bureau, and William Z. Foster, 1950s. He just writes this big textbook, and you learn it all. Marx, Lenin, all of it. Stalin, World War II, the Popular Front. It's all in there. Read The History of the Three Internationals. If you really want to just learn ML. That's what I would recommend. All right. The longshoreman strike. Look, things are looking good for Trump right now. I must say, we've still got a month out, but this longshoreman strike, if this happens, like, holy shit, right? All of a sudden, the goods are not, that's huge. And you combine that with what just happened with the hurricane, and things are looking good for Trump right now. They tell us, it's going to be so close, and Kamala. I think Trump is going to win. I think it's going to be close, and if it's close, there might be some foul play. But honestly, I think things are looking very good for Trump. And if this longshoreman strike happens, holy shit! If that happens, you do realize how many goods come to the United States on ships. You realize the result that's going to have. There's going to be empty stores. Yeah. Yeah, if there's a big longshore strike, and things are looking mighty good for Trump right now, I must say. But you never know. There's just been so much. It's just like up and down every day. I hear mixed things. The polls say this, they say that. It's going to be a very close election. But I got to tell you, Red Illuminati, if that longshore strike happens, if that longshore strike happens, that'll really help Donald Trump. And I must say, I'm a little impressed with some of the unions right now. That are, the Teamsters. That's respectable, right? And the fact the longshoremen are even threatening this strike right now, that's pretty respectable, right? They're not going, oh my God, we're going to, we don't want to help Trump. No, they're just, this is an interesting time we live in. And I have predicted a long time ago, yes, that would be devastating if the strike happens, and Trump would really be the beneficiary. And let me say that I predicted a long time ago that the Republican Party was going to transform into a catch-all populist anti-establishment party, and the Democrats are going to deteriorate into a party that just defends the establishment. And I'm thinking that my prediction is coming true quicker than I thought. And the way Trump spoke at a rally for UAW workers, and the way the Teamsters would not endorse Kamala Harris, and all of that is, now there's this longshore strike that might happen right before the election. Holy moly. Gee Willikers, Batman. But anyway, so then there's a Rumble rant from Penny. Penny says, Minneapolis just recruited a Mexican non-citizen and a young Somalian girl. First, we destroy their countries. Then we give them guns to shoot us. What do you mean they recruited them? What does that mean? You recruited them. What do you mean you recruited them? What do you mean, Penny? You don't have to super chat your answer. You can just tell me your answer. What do you mean that they recruited them? Like they recruited them to come to Minneapolis. They got them involved in politics. Why do they have guns to shoot you? I'm a little lost, Penny. I'm a little bit lost. The police department recruited them. Okay. Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, well, that's police departments are really working on diversifying their image right now. That's a big thing. Police departments don't want to be seen. And you have to remember, all over the world, people hear about American racist police now, right? I mean, I had friends who lived in China, and they were well, anyway, there's a lot of stories I could tell, but I mean, it's just all over the world now. People know, well, the American police are very brutal and authoritarian, and that, so people that come from the developing world are already going to be, all they know about the American police is someone showed them a video of George Floyd, right? So for police departments to want to present in a way that seems more friendly to people from third world countries, that makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And if you've got a lot of folks from Mexico, you got a lot of folks, of course they're watching. Of course they're watching, right? I don't care, right? I mean, they probably watch me while I sleep. I mean, look, I'm very public, right? And that's why I don't do anything illegal, because they would catch me immediately, right? If you're doing anything illegal, stay away from me, because I'm very, very watched, right? So, I mean, that's just the reality, right? If you're involved in, any nefarious illegal activities, I am not someone you want to associate with, because they will catch you, because I'm watched, and I know that I'm watched, and I just whatever. I'm not doing anything illegal, and I love my country. I'm a patriotic American, and I believe the future of America is with the new economy that's emerging around the world. So I'm very proud of all the work that I do, and there we go. I mean, what more is there to say about it? I believe that we need people out in public saying the kind of things that I say. And so I have committed myself to being that guy. I see a desperate need for somebody to be out there saying what I say. So I have decided to be the man that I'm looking for, and I've decided to build the organization that needs to be built. I've taken on a certain job. Now, maybe, and I'm just, there's probably people watching or whatever. I'm just saying, maybe you have decided that you think it's best for you to do something else, right? You think, well, you can best aid anti-imperialism by doing whatever. That's your business. But don't attack me for doing this, because you have to admit, last night I went over all of what CPI has done this year. We've done a lot. We have done a damn lot. And the world is a better place because of everything that we've done. The world is a better place because we distributed 1,000 of these at the Libertarian Convention. The world is a better place because I wrote this book about the Houthis. The world is a better place because my Kamala Harris book went viral. The world is a better place because I'm promoting peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula and working with Korean churches around it. The world is a better place because of the solidarity that we've done for the Uhuru movement and the way we've stood with them and promoted their case at the United Nations and talked about their case in Russia. The world is a better place because we led the U.S. delegation to the World Youth Festival and befriended all those people from the new rising economy. CPI is making the world a better place, right? We are making the world a better place with what we do. And I am proud of what we do. And if you're an honest anti-imperialist, you will recognize that we are making a very good contribution. What we've done for Uhuru, what we've done for the Korean Peninsula, what we continue to do, in solidarity with Russia and international gatherings, what we continue to do with, promoting growth, and we're doing really good work. And if you are a legit anti-imperialist, even if you don't agree with my analysis and the way I explain things, even if you disagree with me about Trump or this or that, you have to admit we're doing good work. We're doing good work. And I would urge you, right, if you have chosen to do something else, I respect that. I'm not going to stop you from doing what you do. Let me do what I'm doing, and you do what you do. And no one's trying to make you do what I do. And if you don't want to do what I do, or you don't think that what I'm doing is what needs to be done or should be the priority, that's on you. Go do what you think should be done. But leave me alone. And, I'm serious. I just want to get this out of my system. If you are somebody who is anti-imperialist, who is pro-Palestine, pro-Russia, pro-China, anti-imperialist, and you don't like what I do, so what? So what, right? Go do what you think needs to be done and leave me the fuck alone and let me get my job done. I have a job to do. I am trying to get the job done. I have a job that needs to be done. There should be 1,000 me's out there doing 1,000 times what I do, but there aren't. And we are in a crazy time right now in this world right now. And if you don't like what I do, do something else. Do something else and do what you think should be done. I think that doing what I'm doing is making a lot of difference in a lot of people's lives. And it's really important what I do, and I'm proud of what I do. And if you disagree with that, that's fine. But I will tell you, there is an endless amount of egos and all of this, and it's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. And like I said, I think what I'm doing is great. And, I'm, especially if you're doing something completely different than me, be happy. I'm not competing with you. Right. And I don't get it. I really don't get it. I really don't get the way certain people act and all that. And, I'm not bothering you. You're not bothering me and all that. I have my views, and CPI we're doing great stuff, and I'm proud of what we do. And, there we go. Come to the workshop in Detroit. If you want to help me and CPI do what we do, come to our workshop. We're going to have a great workshop. It's coming up next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend. Come join us at our workshop. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be there October 12th. We booked the location today. We're in the process of getting together everything, and I booked my flights. I'm heading to Chicago, and yeah, it's going to be a great one-day workshop. Be there. Don't miss it. It's going to be awesome. We have got a job to do. We got time to roll up our sleeves and get the job done. And I'm proud of what we do. And I do want to thank all of you for being here with me night after night and engaging with these ideas. We are on a journey together. We are learning together, and we're getting stuff done together. So on that note, I am going to thank you all once again, tell you all how much I appreciate you. Let's learn together. Let's work together. Let's bring out the best in each other. And now I am going to say good night.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.